صباح الخير والسلام عليكم جميعا ومرحبا بكم معنا في هذا اللقاء الافتراضي الثالث حول موضوع إعادة البناء الشاملة للتراث والانتعاش المجتمعي والاقتصادي بعد الأزمات في ظل أهداف التنمية المستدامة. هذه الأهداف التي أقرتها منظمة الأمم المتحدة على مطلع سنة 2000. لقاؤنا اليوم سيكون إذن باللغتين العربية والإنجليزية وفقا لمحاضرينا، ولكن الترجمة إلى اللغتين متاحة. يرجى فقط للمشاركين المسجلين معنا الضغط على زر اللغة المناسبة، الإنجليزية طبعا إنجليش أو العربية بالضغط على زر اللغة الصينية. نعلمكم كذلك أن هذا اللقاء موجود على المباشر في قناة المركز على اليوتيوب، في حال ما تعذر عليكم الالتحاق بنا من خلال تطبيق زوم أو فقدتم الشبكة. هذه المبادرة إذن من المركز الإقليمي العربي للتراث العالمي هي عبارة عن اللقاء الثالث الذي نعقده ضمن الجهود الرامية لإعداد مؤتمر دولي قبل نهاية السنة الحالية بإذن الله، والذي سيتناول موضوع إعادة الإعمار وتأثيرات الصدمات الناجمة عن الكوارث الطبيعية والبشرية من نزاعات واضطرابات أخرى، وسبل وكيفية كذلك تعافي المجتمعات من النواحي المجتمعية والاقتصادية وإعادة الإعمار والحفاظ على التراث الثقافي. سيتناول خلال لقاء اليوم مجموعة من الخبراء من خلال مداخلاتهم موضوع إعادة الإعمار والتعافي، وذلك من منظور التنمية المستدامة، وكيف لعمليات ومشاريع إعادة التأهيل أن تتبع المناهج والسياسات الثقافية شاملة لضمان السعي لتحقيق أهداف التنمية المستدامة التي أقرتها منظمة الأمم المتحدة في سنة 2015. إذن كيف لنا أن نستعمل تجارب ناجحة وأن نتعلم من مشاريع ومبادرات نفذت في أماكن مختلفة في العالم وركزت على انتهاج محور الاستدامة وكانت نتائجها مثمرة في هذا المجال. إذن لو تسمحون لي سننتقل إلى اللغة الإنجليزية. So good morning everyone, wherever you are. It's our pleasure to have you all with us today for this third webinar entitled Integrated Reconstruction of Heritage in the Post-Trauma Social and Economic Recovery in the Light of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, that is organized by the Arab Regional Center for World Heritage. Just a quick note at the beginning to say that this event will be in English and Arabic, while interpretation is provided in both languages for registered participants. You have just to select the desired language by clicking on the interpretation sign. For interpretation to Arabic, you have to choose the sign Chinese. For English, it's English. So the webinar is also transmitted through our YouTube channel, and the recording will be available on the same channel after we finish. This is the third webinar to be organized in the framework of the International Conference, Integrated Reconstruction and Post-Trauma Impact on Communities and Socio-Economic Aspects of Recovery. This conference that was supposed to be held last year, but due to the restrictions inflicted by the pandemic, we had to postpone it to this year, and it will be held later before the end of the year. Our webinar today will focus then on sustainable approaches to integrated reconstruction and recovery with focus again on socio-economic aspects, as mostly we are trying through this series of webinars to understand how can communities and human-centered approaches encompass wide areas of domain and context to be considered, and that would lead to successful, comprehensive, integrated approaches for reinforcing community resilience, social cohesion, development, and healing in the aftermath of crisis and distress situation. So therefore, it's a real honor for us to announce that we have today in this webinar very knowledgeable experts and speakers with long-standing experience in the fields of cultural heritage protection, reconstruction and recovery, community resilience, human rights and transitional justice, also psychological support and response, as well as cultural heritage economy. On behalf of the Arab Region Center and our esteemed audience, I thank them all for accepting to join us despite their busy agenda, we know, and the challenges inflicted by the pandemic, and the difficulty to have to present and talk about all these complex topics within an online format. So I take this opportunity also to thank our colleague and advisor, Dr. Amra. And now, without any delay, I will pass the floor to my colleague, Sheikh Ibrahim Al Khalifa, the Acting Director of the Arab Regional Center, for the opening address. Please, Sheikh Khalifa, you have the floor.
شكرا لأخ محمد. صباح الخير عليكم جميعا. بالبداية أرحب بكم في هذه الندوة الافتراضية الثالثة المتعلقة بإعادة الإعمار للتراث الثقافي من منظور المجتمعات المحلية والمردود الاقتصادي. طبعا كما تعلمون منذ تأسيس المركز الإقليمي العربي للتراث العالمي في عام 2012 فقد شهدت المنطقة العديد من النزاعات والحروب التي كان لها تأثير كبير وبالغ على العديد من المواقع الهامة للتراث الثقافي في المنطقة العربية، وهو محتم علينا وضع دعم المواقع المهددة بالخطر على قائمة أهم أولويات المركز، وذلك بالشراكة مع شركائنا في المنطقة مكاتب اليونسكو الإقليمية وكذلك مركز إكرم الإقليمي بالشارقة. والآن وبعد مرور 10 سنوات تقريبا أصبح التركيز على التحضير ومساعدة الدول في جهودها في وضع الآلية المطلوبة لخطط إعادة الإعمار، مع الأخذ بعين الاعتبار الدور الحيوي والهام للمجتمعات المحلية والجانب الاقتصادي ومردوده في المرحلة القادمة. طبعا نأمل من خلال هذه الندوة على تبادل الخبرات والمعرفة في هذا المجال، وكذلك بأن تكون منصة للتنسيق والعمل المشترك في المستقبل القريب من أجل حماية أفضل وصون لتراثنا الثقافي. طبعا لا أود أن أطيل عليكم، وطبعا كلمة الآن إلى المتحدثين، لكن طبعا أود أن أشكر جميع من ساهم في نجاح أو في إقامة هذه الندوة، والخبيرة طبعا دكتورة عمرة وجميع المتحدثين وجميع من حضر معنا في هذا الصباح. آملين لكم دوام التوفيق والنجاح وشكرا.
شكرا جزيلا إبراهيم على هذه المقدمة وعلى إعطاء خلفية عن دور المركز في هذا المجال. إذن ومن غير إطالة كذلك نواصل مع المداخلة الأولى التي ستكون مقدمة عن الويبينار بصفة عامة، وبالأخص الطاولة المستديرة الأولى للدكتورة عمرة حجزي محمدوفيتش، زميلتنا ومستشارة المركز فيما يخص قضايا إعادة الإعمار وإعادة التأهيل بعد الأزمات. So I would like to introduce Dr. Amra before we start. Dr. Amra Hadzi Muhammadovich is the director of the Center for Cultural Heritage International Forum Bosnia and consultant and advisor of our center RWH for the editing activities of the Conference on Integrated Reconstruction and Post-Trauma Impact on Communities and Socio-Economic Aspects of Recovery. She has taught history of architecture and architectural conservation at the University of Sarajevo between 2010 and 2019. She was also guest lecturer on heritage in war and post-war, on theory and philosophy of conservation across the world. She worked also on several conservation projects and published a number of publications and articles. Please, Amra, you have the floor. It's over to you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, Mohammed, for this introduction. While we continue to address the multifaceted...
Dr. Amra, please, can you maybe... we can't hear you very well. Your microphone is maybe far from... Yeah.
Now? Is it better now?
Now it's better.
Okay, thank you. While we continue to address the multifaceted issue of heritage as an agent of processing social trauma caused by armed violence and other disasters, let me acknowledge the importance of the fact that this project has been included in the priority fields of action of Arab Regional Center for World Heritage, based in Bahrain. The project started in 2019 with an aim to address the most appealing economic, social, and psychological aspects of relation between people and heritage in the process of post-trauma recovery. Since then, it has evolved into a research project which will result with an edited collection of academic articles on the topics, and into a virtual forum for emerging issues and new lessons learned in 2020 and 2021 through a number of webinars that we have started organizing last year and that we are continuing in this year. I would like to express my personal appreciation and gratitude to the Arab Regional Center for World Heritage for taking leadership or for joining to the leaders in this particularly important aspect of contemporary heritage studies and heritage actions, and for generously providing conditions that all components of the project take place. The project has already involved tens of experts as speakers and authors of the academic papers, and indirectly hundreds of experts from across the globe who have participated in discussions during and after the previously organized webinars. We hope that the impact of the project will be proportional to synergy of the efforts employed in it. Having that in mind, let me acknowledge the important role of professionals and my colleagues from within Arab Regional Center for World Heritage, whom I have been collaborating with since late 2019 in bringing all the ideas to the life. Special thanks to Sheikh Ibrahim Al Khalifa, acting director of the center, for his continuous support and collaboration in this project. Dr. Shadia Tukan, former director, for her encouragements and brilliant advices. To Mr. Mohammed Bouziane, who coordinates all activities related to this project. Mrs. Hansa Mokhtat, Mrs. Leila Eliafi, Amar Bobsheit, and all the other members of the team for all their important inputs to this puzzle. One of the key objectives of the project on integrated post-disaster reconstruction of cultural heritage, social, economic, and psychological aspects of recovery is to look for principles, policies, and guidelines for integrated heritage reconstruction and recovery, which should be people-centered, context-attentive, inclusive, sustainable, and development-oriented. To attain that objective, today's webinar, Integrated Reconstruction of Heritage in the Post-Trauma Social and Economic Recovery in light of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, is planned to address the potential of heritage reconstruction and post-trauma recovery in face of challenges of Agenda 2030. While UN has established Agenda 2030 of actions concerted to reach 17 Sustainable Development Goals and to ensure that all human beings can fulfill their potential in dignity and equality, the appealing issue of disasters and armed conflicts persists. The SDG, what is abbreviation for Sustainable Development Goals, the SDG labels, have been attached to action plans in almost all fields today. However, the ongoing debates on the notion of culture and cultural heritage in Agenda 2030 has become one of the most intriguing, since cultural heritage has been left behind in the agenda, which by itself advocates that no one is left behind, as Ege Yildirim, head of the e-commerce SDG working group, noted. Namely, cultural heritage, more precisely world heritage, has been explicitly mentioned only once in all 17 SDGs in a target 4 of the goal 11. Goal 11 is a goal for the sustainable, inclusive, and resilient cities. The e-commerce SDG working group, in its publication from March 2021 with the title Heritage and the Sustainable Development Goals, Policy Guidance for Heritage and Development Actors, has argued and presented through 17 case studies that the role of cultural heritage should not and must not be neglected in any of 17 goals, their targets, and the implementation actions that are planned to reach the goals and targets. Even before, in 2018, UNESCO and World Bank produced Culture in City Reconstruction and Recovery position paper known as CURE document, based on a number of case studies, which argues that culture is mainstreamed into all sectors and areas of intervention and across all phases of the reconstruction and recovery process, including needs, assessments, scoping, planning, financing, and implementation. While current place-based strategies prioritize the reconstruction of physical assets, integrating culture strengthens a community's sense of belonging, as well as the livability of the built environment. Culture can also support the reconciliation process through the reconstruction of cultural landmarks, monuments, and other places of significance to communities, as it is written in CURE document. The webinar Integrated Reconstruction of Heritage in Post-Trauma Social and Economic Recovery in light of the UN Sustainable Development Goals is designed to offer a background, scope, and preconditions to discuss the possibility of harnessing post-trauma heritage reconstruction for the recuperation of devastated human settlements and communities towards inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable spaces, as well as a human trauma healing process. Today, we will listen to the presentations that will, in fact, inform us how complex this task is. Sometimes, as Professor Lachlan Kelly argues, reconstruction is a wicked problem. However, we will try to position the reconstruction and recovery in some kind of historical framework, which will be done by our colleague Magdalena Marcinkowska. Then we will talk about the post-war recovery heritage economics. Professor Christian Ost will make his presentation about that. And at the end of this panel, Dr. Zaki Aslan will inform us on a multifaceted approach of ICROM concerning the issue of post-war recovery and all the solutions that ICROM is deriving for the region, but also for the global context concerning the challenges that we are facing due to the disasters and distresses that humankind is still faced with. Without further ado, I would like to invite my colleague Mohamed Zian Bouzian, who will co-moderate these panels today with me, to introduce our first speaker, Professor Lachlan Kelly.
Thank you very much, Dr. Amra, for your elaborated introduction. And we thank you a lot for your dedication for our joint project. You've spoken about the SDGs and how they are addressed through a number of goals, although it was only through the goal 11 and target 4. As you mentioned, many publications produced by a number of organizations, including UNESCO, ICOMOS, World Bank, ICROM, and so on, highlighted that culture is really addressed and contribute to a number of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, although it was not highlighted among the goals only through the goal 11, target 4, and the role of culture is clear as enabler and a factor for achieving sustainable development, and we really believe in that. So thank you very much. And now I have the pleasure to introduce our first panelist of the first panel or round table, entitled Toward Resilience, Inclusive and Sustainable Reconstruction of Cultural Heritage and Post-Trauma Recovery. Professor Roland Kelly is a professor of architecture emeritus from the University of College Dublin, where he studied at philosophy then architecture and UC Berkeley. He practiced in London and Dublin. He was active in community development, environmental research, and education with the Irish Foundation of Human Development. He also taught at School of Architecture, UCD, since '73. His research focused on architectural inventory and technology transfer. He was Director of Conservation Studies, Head of School, and then retired from the university in 2007. He is also retired fellow of the Royal Institute of Architects of Ireland, a leading contributor in the Irish government policies on architecture between 2002-2015. He coordinated the EAAE Conservation Network. He's currently also advisor to ECOMOS on the topics related to post-trauma recovery and reconstruction. He is editor, contributor also to a number of journals and books and conferences. Professor Louding, you have the floor. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you for the introduction. Could I have the first slide, please?
Yes, sure.
Thank you. I'm going to talk today about edges or limits. The next slide, please. And in reconstruction, it's almost like entering into a hall of mirrors, because the issue of reconstruction is complex, as we already know, with overlapping contexts that are often difficult to reconcile. And in that maze, I'll focus really on two questions of understanding and action. And starting really from two case studies, one from Uganda and one from Italy. Next slide, please. The background to these studies, they are drawn from a series of pilot studies invited by ICOMOS International as part of a project to develop the matrix for the compilation of case studies. Now, that matrix was developed to address questions of how best to learn from case studies in recovery and reconstruction in order to improve guidance. And it was used as a structuring device in the ICOMOS ICRAM analysis project on recovery and reconstruction, which was published this year. Next slide, please. The two projects, the Kasubi tombs on Nebulana Hill, Kampala in Uganda, inscribed on the World Heritage List in 2001. The main house was destroyed by fire in 2010, fire that was set deliberately. The building was formerly a king's palace, latterly the tomb of departed kings, and it had been reconstructed several times. The reconstruction after the 2010 fire was directed by Jonathan Msbuga. The precise decisions on restoration and reconstruction were mediated by the importance of the place as the spiritual and political epicenter for the Ganda people, and by the ritual significance of materials, their sources and disposition. The exploration of restoration possibilities was mediated through the senior princess, representing the voice of the dead kings. The Duomo di Vinzona in Udine in Italy was destroyed in the Friuli earthquake of 1976. It was originally built in the 14th century as a parish church, was added to several times, particularly in the 17th and 19th centuries, and was subjected to various restoration campaigns over the years. The reconstruction after the 1976 event was begun at the initiative of local population and involved the active engagement of local craftsmen in processes of anastylosis, retaining the marks of its destruction into the future. Its restoration took place over a period of 20 years under the guidance of Francesco Doglioni. Both of these projects have been well published over the years, and they can be accessed as case studies on the ICMOS website. Next slide, please. What can we learn from case studies like this? They're so different in cultural contexts, in the available resources, in the time frames, and so on. Normally, we start by examining commonalities. Both studies involve physical reconstructions of destroyed buildings, re-establishing their form and replacing lost material where necessary, although the amount of replacement differs radically between these two buildings. Even as we can see that very different processes were involved, we don't stay at this level. So looking deeper, we can see the nuanced introduction of contemporary technologies, seeking resilience in terms of structure and building envelope, but done in ways that retained the social and cultural readings of the artifacts and brought about through the medium of the relationships established in the process of reconstruction. Again, in different ways, but with analogous results. Next slide, please. And looking again, begin to see patterns and relationships in the processes of engagement. We see transactional relationships that go beyond conventional roles in architecture and project management. We see issues of resilience and understanding, issues also identified in the ICMOS ICROM analysis project referred to earlier. In particular, these issues relate to knowledge sharing, the relationship between expert and common knowledge. And we see the significance of relationships developed within the post-trauma reconstruction process as key factors in future capacities for the peoples involved. Next slide, please. While we learn from the specific, we also note the general context that was referred to in passing by Amra earlier. We note the general situation, developments within conservation itself that challenge the idea of cultural heritage as something given to us, as something that acquires its value from the past. As well as acknowledging the value from the past, today we also consider conservation of such inheritance as a process of recognition, valuing, and transmission. The challenge of transmission, the transmission to the future of built culture inheritance, has to be juxtaposed with its adaptation to meet contemporary demands, for example, resilience and improved living conditions. And this in turn brings a new focus on ideas about architecture and environmental provision. Next slide, please. And of course, it also creates a particular focus on, say, the conventional expert, non-expert categorizations of knowledge and competence, factors that we saw in the two case studies I cited, and on questions of social organization as well. In the context of development, ideas about architecture and environmental provision also come under question, because we need a critical understanding of environmental provision as an embedded social and cultural process. And here we can refer to works from the past, such as John Turner's discussion about whether something like housing should be considered as a product or as a process, as he would put it, as a noun or a verb. Or we look at Habraken's thinking on the relationships between form and occupancy and how they're interplayed in different cultures. And in relation to social organization, we remember also that organizations do not what they might want to do, but what their structures permit them to do. This is the metaphor of the crab. And as you know, the crab might want to walk straight ahead, but because of its structure, it can only walk diagonally. The same for organizations. Next slide, please. Why talk about ideas? Well, the significance of ideas is that they are primary structuring tools, whether used consciously or unconsciously. We begin to refine the idea of reconstruction, moving beyond simplistic formulae and dogmatic prescriptions. We know from advances in psychology that empathy with the past, and therefore our ability to learn from it, is accessible through the imagination, as well as through scholarship. And that affects our appreciation of meaning and provides a bedrock to our statements of significance. In that framework, reconstruction can be more than an act of retrieval. It can be an act of creation in the context of future making. This is a key concept when we address the range of sustainability goals, and it goes straight to a crucial interplay that lies at the heart of architecture as it deals with inherited environments, especially where these have been degraded. I call this interplay transmission-translation, the process of ensuring that inheritance persists while being modified and adapted for present and future needs. Next slide, please. Transmission-translation of the inherited physical environment is a defining cultural agenda of our time across places and cultures. It is given sharpest expression in reconstruction and recovery, where ideas of inheritance are often challenged and pre-existing social organizations often disrupted, living environments and structures damaged and destroyed. In reconstruction, transmission-translation means re-articulating the ethical agenda for conservation and its place in the production of material culture, geared towards sustainability of human presence on Earth and the place of diversity in maintaining stability in human as well as natural systems. In the context of sustainability, we have become accustomed to the idea of ecology with respect to natural systems. We need to apply it to human systems, developing what the philosopher Christian S. has called an ecology of ideas and action, openness to new definitions, maintaining cultural transmission to the actions of building and rebuilding. Next slide, please. And so we move to the edges, we extend the limits. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Loughlin, Kelly, for this extremely important introduction to the future work of this panel. I would like to use this opportunity to remind all the people in audience to greet our colleagues that are now in audience, that are interested in the topics and that are joining us, that after the panel, we will have some time reserved for discussion. And we kindly ask everyone who has a question or comment to any of the presentations to write it in a question and answers option that is at the bottom of your screen. We will organize our discussion in accordance to the questions and comments that we receive. So thank you very much. Now I would like to invite Mohammed to introduce our next speaker, Magdalena Marcinkowska. Dr. Magdalena Marcinkowska will speak about the reconstruction and recovery of cultural heritage concerning its social and economic aspects.
Thank you very much, Amra, and thank you also, Professor Lachlan, for this very inspiring intervention. I just would like to remind what Dr. Amra mentioned about the questions, and also I would highlight if there will be any of our participants that would like to ask a question in Arabic, that there will be also able to do it. So من فضلكم إذا كان فيه أي سؤال تودون أن تطرحونه على المحاضرين بأي من اللغتين العربية والإنجليزية تفضلوا، فسنقرأ عليهم السؤال بالإنجليزية إذا كان المداخلة أو التعليق باللغة العربية. So thank you very much, Dr. Magdalena Marcinkowska, for being with us. So Dr. Magdalena Marcinkowska is a doctor of international law and expert in cultural heritage protection. She's a member of ICOMOS and ILA Poland. Between 2018 and 2020, she was Deputy Director of Monuments Preservation Department in the Ministry of Culture and National Heritage of the Republic of Poland. She's author or editor of numerous publications on cultural heritage law, including the volume The Challenge of World Heritage Recovery, which she co-edited with Katarzyna Zalsinska in cooperation with Dabrowka Lipska, published in 2019. Dr. Magdalena is currently the permanent delegate of the Republic of Poland to UNESCO. Please, Dr. Magdalena, you have the floor. Thank you again for being with us.
Thank you so much for this introduction. And now I share the screen. I'm so sorry for this technical question first, right?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I'm ready. So once again, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to thank the director of the Arab Regional Center for World Heritage, Sheikh Abrahim Al-Khaifa, Dr. Shadia Tukan and Dr. Amra Haji Mohamedovic for their cordial invitation to this conference. I have to say that I am personally extremely sad that we cannot all meet in Manama in Bahrain. I have visited the center myself in 2018 and I was very impressed by the work that you are doing there. Before I start, I just have a slight question to you. Did you know that Manama is very close to Warsaw? And if you're not, I will tell you at the end of my speech. The task I have been signed up to by Dr. Amra was not an easy one, but it was regarding to show the socio-economic approach to recovery and reconstruction in the doctrinal documents and policy strategies, and how this all is linked to Warsaw recommendation. So let me start. Rapid urbanization, increasing disasters, or evolving conflicts are the factors that define our today's world, according to the position paper, the CURE framework, which was mentioned here today, prepared by UNESCO and the World Bank. Disaster will cost cities across the globe by 2030 some around $340 billion in annual damages and losses. At the same time, as we know, the contemporary armed conflicts are growing, become more complex, involve new actors, and constantly bring havoc and destructions to cultural heritage. Around the world today, according to the statistics prepared by the UNHCR, as a result of armed conflicts, about 70 people are affected by displacement and about 20 of them are refugees. These factors determine the need to rethink what are the socio-economic aspects of cultural heritage reconstruction and why they are important. So now on the screen, you have this timeline that I prepared for you when it comes to the soft law analysis. Socioeconomic aspects of cultural heritage recovery and reconstruction appear rather rarely in the conservation legal acts. However, you might find some relevances in the importance of socio-economic factors in several ICOMOS charters. The most important one for our topic today is the Australian Burra Charter for the Conservation of Places of Cultural Significance and the Washington Charter for the Conservation of Historic Towns and Urban Areas. The first one strictly presents place-based approach, but in the sense of the meaning that the site has to the community. It introduces the so-called Burra Charter process, in which the people-centered approach and social factors of the process of conservation or reconstruction had been emphasized, active social participation of people. The second, the Washington Charter, enumerated its major principle as directly mentioning the social economic aspect of the conservation and restoration, indicating the importance of the involvement of the coherent policies of economic and social development. It presents how important the socio-economic aspects have become when it comes to the process of conservation of the immovable heritage, and how deeply it affects the coherent policies like urban policy, regional planning, and social and economic development of a city. A wider concept of reconstruction of cultural heritage has been presented in the Riga Charter on authenticity and historical reconstruction in relationship to cultural heritage. Its main purpose was to address the political need to establish ground rules for reconstruction, which have become of particular concern since they were caused by the number of urban developments, especially in the countries which recently gained their independence. The Charter stresses that reconstruction is acceptable under exceptional circumstances, but underlines as well that the process of reconstruction needs to be carried out without conjecture or compromising existing in situ remains. When we review the content of the Riga Charter, it shows that, like in the Burra Charter, the most important element of reconstruction was the social impact. The need for reconstruction has to be established through full and open consultations among national and local authorities and the community concerned, as paragraph 6 stipulates. Moreover, all stakeholders involved in the process of recovery, such as governments and administration officials, were recommended to introduce training programs at the level of national and local policies and practices. The soft law document I would like to also mention today is, of course, the recommendation on historic urban landscape. Although it didn't refer directly to the recovery and reconstruction of cultural heritage, the recommendation mentions in its provision that the challenges to historical urban areas can also result from post-crisis situations. To remedy them, the introduced historic urban landscape approach may assist in meaning and mitigating the efforts of such impacts. In this approach, the socio-economic aspects have been underlined by bringing the goals of heritage conservation and those of social and economic development closer together. The people-centered approach is emphasized in paragraph 13 by stressing that the newly established historical urban landscape approach gains experience from traditions and perceptions of local communities without prejudice to the values of the national and international communities. Undoubtedly, ladies and gentlemen, the HAL recommendation is a soft law introduced a holistic approach to the future management and preservation of historic cities. Now, when we look at the policy analysis, the social economic aspects of recovery and reconstruction of cultural heritage have strict connections to resilience and sustainability, as well to the disaster risk reduction strategies. At the global level, we have, of course, the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, which by Dr. Amwa were mentioned today, and the Sendai Framework on Disaster Risk Reduction. Although the social aspects of the recovery and reconstruction of cultural heritage, as it was also mentioned, do not directly do not directly indicated in both of those documents, they refer several times to the importance of cultural heritage protection, and especially in Sendai framework, we find references to cultural heritage and its value both in the process of risk preparedness and post-disaster recovery, reconstruction, and rehabilitation. It advocates to the concept of building back better by providing the participation of local communities and indigenous people in the process of implementing plans and mechanisms in every stage of the risk management process. Just to make it a bit quicker, as you know, the reconstruction and recovery of cultural heritage is strictly connected to the recovery and reconstruction of cities destroyed after disasters resulting from natural hazards and armed conflicts. The acknowledgement of the importance of cultural approach in the process became a milestone step towards the preparedness of the policymaking instruments. As we were mentioning today, in 2018, the World Bank, in cooperation with UNESCO, prepared the position paper entitled Culture in City Reconstruction and Recovery to set up guidance for all stakeholders involved in the process. In this document, culture in its all forms was presented as an effective tool in the recovery and reconstruction policy and programs. The social economic aspects were described, emphasizing that the people-centered approach is a core element when it comes to the recovery and reconstruction of cities. This document indicated that the importance of the people-centered approach is as crucial as the place-based approach, which was recalled previously in the conservation policy instruments. We do not have much time to talk about all of them specifically right now. However, it is worth mentioning that it introduces the 3P approach as an answer to the challenges of the city recovery and reconstruction, putting culture as a main element of the process. And now we're moving to Warsaw. There are many examples, of course, around the world, and we have heard Professor Kili, but to be honest, there is only one that has been recognized in 1980 as a site with outstanding universal value, and that is the Historical Center of Warsaw when it comes to the reconstruction. In the justification of its inscription on the World Heritage List, one may read that it is an example illustrating the effectiveness of conservation activities in the second half of the 20th century, which permitted the integral reconstruction of the complex urban ensemble. Totally destroyed by the Nazi German troops in 1944, it had been reconstructed by a conservation program which resulted in the creation of a unique urban space, but most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, it has a symbolic dimension of an invincible city. A case of Warsaw, the social-economic factor of reconstruction of cultural heritage was so visible at present that the ICOMOS evaluation emphasized it in its final report by recalling that between the 1945 and 1966, the will of nation brought to life again a city which was in 85% destroyed. This reconstruction, unique and understanding, had started, as many at that time, right after the World War II, without any guidance or international conservation soft law instruments. It was orchestrated by the Warsaw conservation authorities with a carefully prepared plan of the recovery of the city, and with an aim not only to rebuild monuments in the material sense, but also to revitalize the living environment for the local community in their familiar context. This was back then, ladies and gentlemen, for late 40s and up to 60s, that what we are now today are recognizing as a socio-economic approach to recovery and reconstruction of cultural heritage. Decades later, this unique type of Warsaw reconstruction was recalled again in recognition of the heroism and dedication of the Polish society, which was rebuilt in its capital city. being symbolic for all the cities affected by the tragedy of disasters resulting from natural hazard or conflicts. It also gave ground to Warsaw Recommendation on Recovery and Reconstruction of Cultural Heritage. In this document, a comprehensive set of principles concerning the process of urban recovery and reconstruction of historic buildings or complexes of buildings was introduced. The provisions of the Warsaw Recommendations were subsequently approved in the decision of the UNESCO World Heritage Committee and its 42nd session in Manama, Bahrain. So now you see why Bahrain is so close to Warsaw and why Manama is so close to Warsaw as well. Very recently, the document has been translated into Arabic, for which I wish to thank once again Director Zaki Aslan from ICROM Sharjah. Now, coming back to the Warsaw Recommendation, among the non-binding principles, the socio-economic aspects of recovery and reconstruction has been underlined very strongly, recommending a people-centered approach in the decision-making processes on recovery and reconstruction, which should fully engage local communities as well as indigenous people. Moreover, the Warsaw Recommendation states very clearly that the process of recovery and reconstruction should enable people to connect to their heritage, identity, and history. For the first time, the cultural heritage rights were also mentioned as an important element in every reconstruction program. And just to conclude, the socio-economic approach of the recovery and reconstruction of cultural heritage became more visible than ever, showing that not only the place-based approach in its complied process is essential. Although the concept of the recovery and reconstruction in the conservation doctrine has long been considered as a threat to world heritage, especially to its authenticity and integrity, recent developments, however, for instance, the cases like in Timbuktu historic tombs in Mali, clearly show that the conservation policy evolved in time, and the other aspect may also play an important role in the post-crisis situations. All reconstruction programs launched around the world, just to mention UNESCO flagship initiative Revive the Spirit of Mosul, or in Syria or Nepal, show that the social economic approach in the recovery and reconstruction of cultural heritage is crucial. It brings not only social cohesion and resilience, but also moral support and help to people by allowing them to be part of the revival process. As the Warsaw example presents very vividly, by restoring objects, people effectively restore their community's dignity and rebuild their culture and national identity. And for those who would like to read some more, I also presented on my last slide some references to the links. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you. Can you just stop sharing your screen, please?
Yes, sorry.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this presentation and this panoramic view of the soft legal documents that in fact tackle reconstruction, either explicitly or implicitly. It is also important to be reminded on the significant case of Warsaw case of reconstruction that in fact was supposed to be a unique case of inscription reconstructed site to the World Heritage List. However, there are some other, and there are a lot of cases of reconstructed sites. Mostar, one of them, Old Bridge in Mostar, that in fact was inscribed after its reconstruction as well as Warsaw. So this case on the best way shows this what Lachlan was in fact informing or suggesting transmission and translation, the relation between this transmission and translation, and how reconstruction becomes act of creation in future making. I would also like to mention here, Lachlan Kelly used one of two case studies, is in fact case study on Kasubi tombs. At one of our previous webinars, Jonathan presented the case of Kasubi tombs. which in fact were destroyed again in 2020 due to the lack of management in the COVID-19 context. So the reconstruction is in fact something that is repetitive process. There is no question if it is going to be reconstructed again. It just, when we were working in ICOMOS ICROM, like a project on case studies, we made a diagnosis that there is this intermittent sort of destruction and reconstruction that takes place and goes on. So I would like now to ask kindly Mohammed to introduce Professor Christian Ost, who will speak about the heritage recovery economics. As you might notice, the concept of the whole project that we have started in 2019 is some kind of the echoing of the critical heritage studies. We are trying to go beyond this authorized heritage discourse and to, in fact, provide some kind of a comprehensive discourse on heritage, and especially post-trauma recovery of heritage, where psychological aspect, economical aspect, legal aspect, social, etc., anthropological are extremely important. So Mohammed, over to you.
Thank you very much, Amra, and thank you, Dr. Magdalena, for your wonderful intervention. So Professor Christian Ost, our following speaker, has a PhD in economics from the Université Catholique de Louvain, a master's degree in economics from Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., and a European degree from the University of Geneva. He is professor and former dean of ICHEC Brussels Management School, guest lecturer at the Raymond Lemaire International Center for Conservation in Louvain, and at the Université Catholique de Louvain. He has been developing the field of economics applied to cultural heritage since the 80s, collaborated with many universities and organizations such as ICROM, UNESCO, European Commission, and the World Bank. And he was in residence scholar at the Getty Conservation Institute in Los Angeles between 2008 and 2009. And he is currently member of the advisory board of Global Heritage Funds and of the ICOMOS International Economic Scientific Committee, which he was former chairman to. Professor Ost, please, you have the floor. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mohammed, for this kind presentation. I will share my screen. Tell me if this is, check here like this. Could you
see it? Yes.
Yeah, okay. So thank you for the presentation, and also thank you for the invitation, and especially to the organizer of this webinar and the Arab Research Center for World Heritage. And it's always a pleasure to be here, because also my colleague and friend, Dr. Amra, but also Dr. Zaki, it's always a pleasure to work and to cooperate together on these important issues. So in the timeline of the 12 minutes, I would like to present some insights into the question of the economics related to the integrated reconstruction, and I will try to speak not too fast so that I can be understood, and for the translators. And also, what I would like to say is that usually we expect from economists to be pragmatic, to bring maybe some solutions, not just to raise some issues. And this is what I hope I will give you through some examples, but also some reminder of what heritage economics is all about, and how it can maybe be helpful to this issue of reconstruction in exactly the line as Magdalena just explained about social and economic approach. So what I would like to start with is just to give the interpretation of this main question that we raise here in terms of economics. Basically, what we have to deal here with this question is to ask two questions. It's a twofold questions. We expect that conservation, of course, and the protection of cultural built heritage will contribute to social and economic recovery. And we have also in this webinar the framework, the overarching framework of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So in practical terms, these are two questions. The one is how heritage conservation can be effective in contributing to economic outcomes. I will emphasize economic outcomes, but of course, we know that social, economic, environmental outcomes are very related to that. And the second question is, you may have effectiveness in heritage conservation contributions, but the question is also, is it sustainable? If you take tourism, for example, is a very good example of what I mean, because conservation may attract and have an appeal about more tourism, but the other question is, how can we manage tourism in a sustainable way? So I will take these two criteria, I would say effectiveness and sustainability, and try to decipher maybe the issue in economic terms. So just a slide to remind maybe what we expect from heritage economics. The fact that when we apply economics to the heritage, it's not just a question of spillovers, of touristic outcomes, but it is another perspective on what the cultural heritage is. And the cultural heritage is what we call, and what David Crosby years ago introduced in the literature as a cultural capital. It's a cultural capital, which means that there is a value attached, it not just in terms of cultural values, but also in terms of economic, social, environmental values, and maybe others also. And so the process of a capital it's a dynamic process. You get these resources initially invested in the making of heritage. Sometimes it's a long time ago, but we have this conservation, which is something where we reinvest. Basically, conservation is an investment process because you invest resources. You invest not just money, but you invest, of course, some materials, some skills, some knowledge into some tradition, into the heritage. And at the end of the line, we expect that this cultural capital may provide something. Of course, it provides cultural values. This is the main purpose, but here we bring an emphasis also on the fact that this capital may produce a lot of new goods and services. This is how the heritage economics comes into conservation, integrated conservation, where we can at the same way protect the heritage and provide something in terms of sustainable outcomes. And you see on the right side of the slides that what we expect from that in terms of economics is quantitative and qualitative outcomes. Quantitative, it's not just monetary. As you know, economics has a broader meaning. It's about jobs also, it's about quality of life, it's about well-being, it's about everything that it's related to what even either visitors or residents experience with the heritage. And these outcomes is sometimes called values. I don't have time for a long discussion here, but I think there is sometimes a misunderstanding here about economic being values or economic being outcomes. Social also. Social, you get social values at one side, what it's in the Burrash Charter, for example, but you get social impact or social outcomes on another side. And sometimes there is a confusion between these two, but we can maybe come back on that during the question time. So in a nutshell, if I deal with these economic outcomes or the economic values, the literature tells you that we agree that we have 4 channels or 4 types of values. The very first is, of course, the construction and the works, the conservation works that provides some economic values. This is in terms of jobs, income, and revenues. But as I explained, it also covered some qualitative skills, some qualitative knowledge, and so on. Then number 2, you get these use values, which is very important these days because the use values is the purpose of the heritage. We know that some heritage can be protected with no specific use because some intrinsic cultural values. But again, I think there is a very important discussion here to see the question about using and reusing and for which purpose the heritage, because basically the heritage has always been built for a purpose. So this question is what we call the use values, because these are more marketable, which mean that most of these values are usually private, benefiting to individual and more or less easy to manage and to measure. On the opposite, you get the number 3 categories of values, the non-use values. The non-use values is basically linked to the feeling, the emotions, all the qualitative judgment or opinion or enjoyment maybe that we have by experiencing a visit or by getting some identity or tradition related to the heritage. As you probably know, non-use values are important in economic terms because these are non-marketable. There's no market, there's no demand and supply basically for non-use values. And despite the fact that non-use values are probably bigger than use values, let's just imagine, how people are really committed to the World Heritage or to a destroyed, post-trauma destroyed heritage. This commitment is really huge, but it is not marketable because it's a kind of sentiment. The challenge here is to capture some of these things and to make through crowdfunding, through operations conducted by UNESCO or by Aga Khan Trust or other organizations, a way to bring these non-use values in terms of use values and in terms of more specific economic outcomes. So a large part of the economic literature, as you know, is dedicated to these non-use values and how to measure these non-use values. And you may have heard about the contingent valuation method and the willingness to pay, which is today really measured over a large area. And the number 4, the last, is about the externalities. The externalities are impact about the heritage for third parties. This may be important. We have this example of all the derived impact from tourism or the impact on the climate change, on the environmental impact, basically on a large community because of the heritage. And as you will know, we'll see in a minute, of course, externalities are extremely important in terms of not just effectiveness, but sustainability, because the positive and negative impact of every decision that we take these days are either positive or negative externalities related to environmental purpose. Negative externalities can be a mass tourism that brings a threat to the heritage. A negative externalities can be an impact of climate change through the transportation of mass tourism, some sort of pollutions. Positive externalities can be a very wide range of impact beneficial to a large community also. If I take these 4 categories, I will take just one example, so 4 slides, and that's it. One example for each of the one. About the values from reconstructions, you probably know that these days we develop a lot of concern about circular economy. I may, and I will refer later about an Horizon 2020 European project that is just completed now, about the CLIC project, where we developed our circular economy can be in line with the cultural heritage. Conservation is a circular mechanism, I would say, de facto, by itself. And a circular economy is this sustainability 2.0 that we expect with some local, you see, inclusive outcomes and impact of what we do. This is an example that you see for the city of Cairo, and that was part of a study conducted for the city of Cairo in terms of the maintenance and in terms of conservation, but with an emphasis of who is doing that job, who is getting these skills, and in terms of families, that you get these intangible or the traditions, and that it's of course a lot more effective to make these conservation works contributed by these families and these existing skills, local skills, rather than from the outside. Of course, you will always need some expertise also and some help maybe from the outside, but it's important to maybe to document exactly how this conservation works, not just provide jobs of any kind, but provide some local jobs which can be related to some social impact and local impact for the community living in the city. The second example is related more to the category of use values, of marketed values, and this is...
Professor Faust,
yes?
I'm sorry if I may interrupt. Just can you please summarize the remaining slides? Because time is up and we still have one intervention. I'm sorry.
Okay, I will cover it fast. So the use values is just related to this question of adaptive reuse and about function of cultural built heritage that we dealt a moment ago. Then the non-use values. I like this sentence by Victor Hugo to say that, you see, the beauty is a kind of public good or public service. That means that everyone, the heritage belongs to everyone. And in that consideration, the recommendation of historic urban landscape is, to me, a very important thing where you provide community and participatory approach. These are workshops now that are working very well with some kind of rules and with some kind of routines. And the last consideration is about these externalities for third parties. The externalities for third parties is most of the policy issues. Why the policy issue? Because we are more about a macroeconomic or macro-social perspective here, and that in order to get the effectiveness and sustainability that I mentioned, we need to coordinate these facts. We get a lot of transfer that you get these incentives, the subsidy, the fiscal regime, and the redistribution impact that we need to take into account, as well as the equity in any policy decisions. So this is my last slide. These 4 categories would suggest to document about the stakes and the stakeholders about categories of economic values, which are related also to social and environmental impact in a sustainable way. And this table, you can read them by yourself, will show you that the measure that we need to take should be targeted for different kind of public, different kind of audience, different kind of economic and social actors, and also that the diversity and the variety of stakes requires that we have some coordination processes, as I said, in terms of policy issues. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Ost, for this very relevant and important presentation. And now we are moving to our next speaker, Dr. Zaki Aslan. He is yet another friend in this group. Through all these years, we have developed some kind of the family of people working in the field. And I think that this room is the very core of that family. Zaki, welcome. And I would like to ask Mohammed to introduce Dr. Zaki, who will present his personal rich knowledge and experience, but also extremely important experience and work of ICCROM in the field of post-war recovery and reconstruction of cultural heritage.
Thank you, Amra, and thank you very much, Professor, for your very interesting intervention. It was really enlightening. Dr. Zaki, we are very happy to have you with us today, our colleagues and partner from ICCROM. Dr. Zaki Aslan is the regional representative of ICCROM for the Arab states and director of the ICCROM Sharjah Regional Conservation Center in the United Arab Emirates. He is conservation architect. He has been the manager of ICCROM's Athar program since 2003, since its beginning. Dr. Aslan provided technical advice to the Arab states on issues ranging from heritage conservation and management to education, public outreach, capacity building, and so on. He holds a PhD in heritage conservation and management from University College London in the UK, and a master's degree in conservation of the built environment from the University of Montreal in Canada. Dr. Aslan also served as honorary senior lecturer at the University College London in the UK and adjunct professor at the American University of Sharjah. He is also currently a visiting professor at the University of Sharjah in the United Arab Emirates. تفضل دكتور زكي، معك الخط. شكرا جزيلا.
Shukran jazilan, Muhammad. Thank you very much, Muhammad. And it's in fact, as Dr. Amra said, I'm between friends and colleagues in this webinar. I'm very honored and pleased to be with you all. Special thanks, of course, goes to the ARC-WH for organizing these fantastic series of webinar on this topic that is really an important topic for this region. Thanks, of course, go to Sheikh Ibrahim, acting director of the center, together with all the colleagues at the ARC-WH, and Dr. Amra Haji Muhammadovich, who has been working on this project and trying to get this publication ready, which we are all looking forward to see very soon, I hope. Okay, for today, I actually wanted to focus on what we have been doing as ICCROM, as activities and efforts in this particular field. And As you know, ICRAM is an international organization supporting everything related to institutional capacity building and trying to disseminate knowledge and methods in the field of conservation. And this particular field of recovery and reconstruction is something that has been with us for the past few years. So I will take forward what Dr. Magdalena Marcinkowska stopped, in fact, since 2017, 2018, and I will try to introduce you to what we have been doing since then to complement the other speakers. Of course, time is not really going to allow me to go into details, but I hope the paper will be also getting into more details of all the efforts and all the activities that we have been doing so far. Starting from Sustainable Development Goals, in fact, ICRAM's strategic directions as a whole is stemmed from this these concepts of Sustainable Development Goals. And when it comes to recovery of cultural heritage, one can think about certain ones related to cities, communities, education, building peace, partnerships, etc. So we are working in this as part of our biannual program and budget, and we continue to do that through our activities, particularly in this part of the world where much of this cultural heritage has been destroyed in the past decade or so. And that, in fact, gave the reasoning for establishing this office also of ICRAM in the United Arab Emirates, also to serve the member states in the region. I'm sure you are familiar with such images. I'm not going to explain, but what I wanted to highlight at the beginning, in line with the title of this webinar, the premise of this presentation, in fact, I wanted to focus that in times of armed conflict, not only are the physical manifestations of cultural heritage subject to partial or total loss, but also the social and cultural associations with custodian communities, as these associations are often severely affected by the suffering of high death rates, mass displacement, and emerging traumatized memories. They solely fall on the intrinsic components of cultural identity. Such components, of course, include the sense of belonging and attachment, self-identification, and social cohesion, particularly in relation to cultural diversities. These images are from the city of Beirut, and as you see here, the reconstruction, in fact, after the civil war that took place since 1975 till 1990, with the efforts to reconstruct the central part of Beirut, raised a lot of issues, central of which is the community dimension. And these images, in fact, were illustrated the unsatisfactory, let's say, dimension of communities in how the reconstruction was developed at that time. So there are many lessons that we can learn since that time in the region to see how we can learn from Beirut when the central area was hugely excavated, very individual remains, such as the one here below, kept and integrated into what is nowadays is the souk of Beirut. So this is something we can learn everything, in fact. What went wrong in Beirut, we can take forward and learn for reconstruction in cities like Aleppo, Mosul, and others in the region. The Beit Beirut, which commemorated the events at the time, and more lately the explosion of August 2020, I think is something that we need to reflect on in any reconstruction and recovery project that we work on. Aside from the importance of documentation and the use of all the technological aspects and technologies and tools that we have, I think there is this dimension that I'm trying to emphasize on here in this presentation. ICCROM's programs, since their inception, were focusing on the risk management cycle, and we worked a lot in the since in fact the 80s, the 90s on the area of preventive conservation before disasters, and then we looked into first aid and response since 2010, more or less, with my colleagues in Rome. This program has been evolving, and it was really an important program to build the capacities of first aiders. But more lately, we have been more involved in the after disasters aspects related to recovery and post-crisis. From that time of starting to look into preparedness, the Bureau of Crisis Prevention and Recovery alerted us at that time that there is a necessity to raise awareness of this rhythm of I should say the transition phase between crisis response and recovery, where there is a breakdown, lost momentum, partial solutions in place, and rebuilding risks become dependent on external support. So this aspects that we have been trying to develop in the past years is to see how we could look into more self-resilient approaches, how we could reduce risk in the right time, in early recovery period, where we could have smooth transition and continuity that could be integrated into development. And we talk about sustainable development here. So this is really at the heart of the aspects that we're trying to address. In 2006, more or less that time, also we had a forum that highlighted lessons learned from the past on cultural heritage post-war recovery, where you could see here in front of you and on the screen the need for integrated approaches, sustained political financial support, how we could work on capacities and local participation, especially communities, and how we could look into robust conservation approaches and reconstruction, which we will come to in a moment, but together with addressing the gaps that I've just mentioned related to legislation, legal measures, but also diversities and how we could deal with the identities and the values that communities bear, in post-war societies. So in 2017, we had a first roundtable activity, an international event to address the subject, looking at several case studies from Europe and the Middle East in particular, but also other regions, to look into what we can do. That took us further in our General Assembly on the same year, and we devised here basic aspects related to what we want to do and take further in terms of how we could develop methods and applying these notions of social and community centered approaches in the recovery processes. So we had preprints of that Louvre Relance conference, the first one that I have just mentioned. But then we had other events related to the importance of documentation with what was called at the time the Rome Appeal, to look into the various aspects and various dimensions related to documenting heritage at risk. But more recently, in February 2019, and several of the colleagues here attended or participated in this workshop, we looked into case studies and we tried to collect data of existing data to see how we could develop capacity building tools. So through these activities, we went to study specific cases, field experience-driven principles and practices and tools and recommendations, so that we could take forward the knowledge that we have been trying now to develop and apply in projects that we are leading, but in a form of guidance and kind of especially for practitioners and participants of our courses, focused on these notions of achieving social, cultural, economic, political, and physical sustainability and resilience through regaining the heritage values. And Professor Ost took us in more detail in that respect, and reconstructing these socio-cultural, economic, and political livelihoods of communities, and how we could develop that in a more methodological way. And finally, how we could reduce the risks and vulnerabilities for cultural heritage for such environments where crisis has happened. In addition to that, the idea was also to look into aspects that I've just mentioned also earlier, related to social cohesion, psychological recovery, sustainable development for the affected communities. So this recovery approach has these adjectives, if you want, or characters that we are trying now to put down in our guidance that we've been developing. This approach should be inclusive, holistic, context-specific, and compatible. I'm not going to go into the details, but you could maybe read the screen because of the time constraints, but all will be explained in the paper. In essence, what we are trying to look at the phases of recovery on your left-hand side, how we analyze the situation, how we inform people to give them the tools to analyze situations in post-conflict environments, and how to devise planning methods, and how we implement through by addressing various sectors beyond the cultural heritage reconstruction per se, into urban, social, cultural, economic recovery, as we see here on this screen. So this is the idea of how we will be developing such guidance for capacity building purposes. These we will apply in projects that we have been leading, especially in Mosul, together with UNESCO. My colleagues from Rome are also leading this particular project that we started here at the beginning, and how we started to look into assessing the damage, but also working with communities. You see here in the last photograph below, we tried to really understand how the communities perceive this. That was just the starting point, just to give you an idea and a flavor of what this guidance will be about. But we have been, as Dr. Magdalena Markonovska mentioned also, we have translated the recommendations also to use for capacity building purposes. And she also mentioned the importance of such recommendations, which was endorsed by the World Heritage Committee. More recently, and this was really a very significant project for both ICROM and ICOMOS, I believe, and both Professor Keeley and Dr. Amra were engaged in this particular case studies project, will also take us one step further to look into the various dimensions of recovery and reconstruction. And this publication in 3 volumes is now available, and I think would be a good basis also for learning from various case studies and different dimensions that Professor Keeley thankfully addressed in his speech earlier. More projects that we have been dealing with is the Western Sudan Community Museums. And this is actually, we're talking about the area of the west of Sudan where there was major conflict in Darfur area in particular. And we tried to select 3 museums, historic museums, which have collections. And the idea of this project was also to see how we could apply these methods that we have been developing in the past few years. So while this project looked into 3 particular museums in Omdurman, Al-Ubaid, and Nyala, with the support of the British Council, we had major funding, in fact, to see how we could make these museums work as community hubs, how we could make them places of reconciliation of societies who had, for decades, different, they come from different tribes, and different conflicts have occurred in this particular part of Sudan. So what we have been trying to do, in addition to looking into how we reconstruct the physical aspects of these buildings and refurbish them and improve them through capacity building work that we have been doing, we also wanted to revive these ethnographic collections of people, because these actually belong to the people and the communities of these areas, how we could also manage such collection, but more importantly, how we could ensure this community engagement. And here we have tried to influence a story of change of displaced communities, of conflicts, especially in Al Ubaid, and how we could make these places, the museums themselves, as places where living heritage is celebrated. We're talking not only about the physical aspects, but also of the all intangible folklore, cooking, what have you. Like people come together because they share such heritage, and heritage becomes, a tool for peace building and for reconciliation. Finally, I'd like to add some of our activities that complement all these projects, particularly related to capacity building, with the master's program that we have now. And also we've been honored to have also the ARC-WH with us in this program for World Heritage aspects. We address also through research projects the area of reconstruction. In fact, some of the students that are working now in Beirut, Libya, and I see that they are attending this webinar. So such research work is also helping us to see how we could look at case studies more closely and develop that much further. Also through another program that we have for historic cities in this biennium of our program. Our work also in capacity building of reconstruction, stabilization have been hands-on. Some images that we had for Syrians working in Lebanon. But also exhibitions, pictures before and after. We started this traveling exhibition in Bahrain, in fact in Manama, and then we took it further to Jordan and then to Morocco to raise the awareness of the impact of the destruction of such cultural heritage in the various parts of the Arab world. More recently, our Sharjah Award program, Ikram Sharjah Awards program, addressing the youth and the young, but also addressing projects. There was a winning project on, we're trying to encourage also such use of methods in working in such environments. The Souq al-Saqtiyya of Aleppo project has won the award of last year. It was led by the Aga Khan Trust for Culture. And this was actually a starting point where you could really bring back the life in the city of Aleppo. This is the picture that you can see here on the left, before and after of Souq al-Saqtiyya. And again, what have been developed through UNESCO, and that CURE position paper was also mentioned by the former speakers, how we could take this forward and implement it on the ground. This is something that we are trying to do. In conclusion, I wanted just to highlight keywords of the approaches and the guidance that we have been developing related to keywords such as living heritage, integrated approaches, people-centered approaches. Of course, we're working on this in detail. Partnerships with various organizations, including the ones that are attending today, but also how we outreach and reach the young people and the youth. And of course, for us as a specialist institution for capacity building, how we develop the didactic tools for the practitioners and stakeholders to use such methods and tools in their work. So another keyword perhaps is resilience, and I chose some images just to show you. This is a picture from Homs, where the people came to the church to pray. without the ceiling. And as you see here, it's a very touching thing to see how that should be part of our work now in the methods that we are developing in this area. And of course, I mentioned the youth, the future, and how we can work together to reach the youth, because they are the ones who will take forward the future of our cities and the destruction that has happened. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zaki Aslan, for this wonderful presentation and such a wide array of your activities and achievements. Congratulations. So it has been very inspiring, and especially having in mind that capacity building is probably the most powerful tool of sustainability and building resilience. So the way how you do that is in fact something that informs all of us how to proceed with this, especially the examples that are showing how you use this capacity building to empower people and to especially women, as we could see at your photos, but is one of targets of Sustainable Development Goals, and how you leave no one behind. So we have some questions from the audience. However, our time for the first session has expired. What we suggest is to stop now for a break of 15 minutes, to resume our webinar at 12 sharp, so 15 minutes for a quick coffee. And at the end of the webinar, we will have a question and answer session and discussion. So all the questions that we have already received will be, in fact, presented to the speakers at the end of the webinar. Thank you very much for the wonderful morning, and I'm looking forward to meet you again. So what I would like to suggest to all participants, do not leave the meeting, just switch off your micro and video. Stay at the meeting, do not leave it. So see you in 15 minutes.
Good morning and hello back again. It's our pleasure to resume our webinar for today and continue with the second panel entitled People-Centered Reconstruction and in Recovery of Cultural Heritage as a Method of Social Trauma Processing. We are very happy to have had the privilege to listen to our esteemed speakers for the first panel. It was very interesting with very relevant presentations to each other, and we could also explore and discover approaches and ideas that are very interesting and could help us to continue also the following more case studies-based interventions. Now, without delay, before I give the floor to our first speaker, I would like to hear from our colleague, Dr. Amra. Please, you have the floor. Dr. Amra, your microphone is muted. Sorry.
Sorry. So we are starting with our second panel. I would like to thank again to the panelists from the first panel and for all the inspiring presentations, both inspiring, informative, and extremely important for the future research and actions in this field. The second panel will be about people-centered reconstruction and recovery of cultural heritage as a method of social trauma processing. We will expect from our presenters to talk about the case studies in which people and heritage were affected by violence, and how this relationship between the people and heritage in post-trauma in fact was established. As we have already received the papers, the contribution for the book by the presenters that are today with us, I can bear witness that the contexts are totally different and the responses for the context are different as well. Today we will have again at this panel experts in diverse fields. Mrs. Luna Rajab will present, who is a conservation architect with a long experience in this field and the personal experience of dealing with trauma in her home country. She will talk about cultural heritage as a gateway to exit the Syrian crisis. After that, we will have a presentation by Dr. Rachel Killian of the paper that was done together with Dr. Dacia Vierose from Cambridge University. Rachel will today present the part of the paper that the other sort of aspects of the paper will be presented at the conference. It will be her experience from Cambodia on assessing harm to inform meaningful measures of repair, the case of Cham people heritage in Cambodia. The third presentation will be presented by a group of colleagues that will inform us on a meaning or significance of heritage for the survival and psychological recovery of people living under the siege in Gaza. The presenters will be Marilena Collier and her colleagues Rafif and Nada from the Première Urgence International NGO that works at the occupied Palestinian territory. Marilena will inform us about the definition of historical trauma and how this historical trauma in fact affects Palestinians in the occupied territories, especially under the siege in Gaza, and how cultural heritage is used as an agent of trauma processing at these occupied territories. Without any further ado, I would like to ask Mohammed to introduce our colleague Luna Rajab, and I would like to ask Luna to present the paper.
Thank you very much, Amra. So our first speaker will be Ms. Luna Rajab from Syria. She is a consultant architect, expert in cultural heritage since 1993. She has been involved in conservation projects of cultural heritage in Syria since 2000. Ms. Luna has provided consultancy on destruction of heritage and post-trauma recovery in Syria to several organizations such as UNESCO, ICOMOS, GIZ, Musée du Louvre, UN Espoir, Institut National du Français du Proche-Orient, IFPO. She serves as a national expert for DGIM in Damascus for Cultural Tourism Development Program in Syria, funded by the European Union. Currently, she works as executive manager and partner at ACE, Architects and Consult for Architect and Consulting Engineers, a multidisciplinary architectural and engineering consultancy company, and as a coordinator for MWNF. Please, Ms. Luna, you have the floor. I will share your presentation if you allow me.
I will share it if you like.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Maybe you know, Mohammed, if you share it yourself, maybe it's better. This will
Okay.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much, Dr. Amra, for allowing me to present this presentation. And all the thanks for the center and for all the people who works really hard to coordinate this project and this work. This work has been, the presentation and all the work that is inside it has been prepared specially for this event, for the publication also. And I would like to mention that it give me lots of sorrows to do it, but it's a must to do this. I will be talking about cultural heritage as a gateway to exit the Syrian crisis. The study is about the participative, people-centered, context-responsive reconstruction as a trauma healing process. Research, knowledge, and experience of the potential of participative and people-centered reconstruction should contribute to better understanding of the impact of reconstruction on local communities. My part will be as a storytelling from my experience and from the reading of the facts. Next, please. Next, please, Mohammed. Yes, thank you. Through a complicated relationship and environment, the material and immaterial cultural heritage had developed throughout the ages. This interactive relationship presents a substantial contribution in environmental development. Therefore, the people are considered as the center element in reconstruction after crisis in general and in the historic cities and around archaeological sites in specific. During these 10 years of the Syrian crisis, cultural heritage in Syria has been and continued to be subject to various types of sabotage, some of which was destruction by the ignorance, but others were deliberately and intentionally aimed at destabilizing the human being, crushing his souls, and destroying architecture, urbanism, and economy, and everything that might help the people to live. The destruction has affected all the society, not only that local community residing in the centers of ancient cities that have been affected by high level of destruction, but also affected the soul of the Syrian wherever he lives. Next, please. We can see here a photo of the old city of Aleppo around the citadel, the citadel of Aleppo, and we can see the mass destruction that has happened there. And it was deliberately. Next, please. The sabotage targeted the psychological health of the Syrian by destroying the safe place in which he lives, his house, the neighborhood, and the city, and by linking the homeland with pain and death and losing loved ones. The sabotage, next please. Next, yes. The sabotage also targeted the historical symbols and cultural heritage in order to destroy the national identity and sense of belonging. This is the old souks of Aleppo, one of the unique souks in the whole world. Next, please. It is also sabotage of a human soul because of the religious discrimination that it spreads in an attempt to make the people of the same country fear from each other. Perhaps the most dangerous thing that can happen to a person is his feeling of insecurity in his home in which he lives. Therefore, residential areas were among the areas that were most subjected to bombing and vandalism, causing the exit of their people and displacing them. The issue of demolishing the safe habitat and the historic overlaying urban fabric of ancient cities, which is the ancient dwelling displacing people from their homes and alleys, intimidating them with insecurity and safety, and planting their memories of the tragedies that happened to them in these areas, and thus most of them will refuse to return to their area. The highest rates of devastation and demolishing among the ancient city centers in Syria were concentrated in the old city of Aleppo, inside and outside the ancient walls. The percentage of destruction in it reached about 75% of the total of the old city, of which 25% were largely destroyed, and this destruction included the ancient building and the famous historical monuments. In the old city of Aleppo, 10% of these monuments had been completely demolished. In addition to these monuments, we find that the damages have affected the old historical market, the khans, and the urban fabric of the traditional homes that included several thousand of residents. To deepen the understanding of the relationship between people and cultural heritage during the crisis, I prepared specific questions to be asked during the interviews with a selected variety of Syrians that I met. Among the people that I had interviewed was my cousin Nisreen, who used to live in the old house of our grandfather with her parents. She was born and raised in this spacious old house, built of beautiful carved stones. She was one of the millions who were forced to leave their residences because of the dangerous situation of every second. First of all, she lost her young husband, Abdul Latif, who was shot by a sniper, then younger brother Rida, and finally her youngest cousin Akram. Both were killed. Life became very dangerous where she lives with her 2-year-old daughter. When I asked her about her experiences in living culture, heritage that she used to live in, and about her forced to abandon her life, she replied, next please. The text is in English on the screen and I'm going to read it in Arabic. عند الفقد نتألم ولو كان المفقود على سبيل المثال مجرد دفتر أو قلم. كون الأشياء قد أصبحت في عداد المفقودات كفيل تماما بمضاعفة قيمتها لدينا بشكل يتجاوز المنطق بعض الأحيان. فكيف والمفقود وطن؟ لم أحلم يوما بل ولم أفكر حتى بمغادرة الحي الذي ولدت وترعرعت فيه. ولو أني لم أتزوج لما غادرته أبدا إلى الحي الذي يليه. كان شعوري بالغربة حينها يطغى على كل شعور جميل. لم أكن أعلم بأن هنالك غربة أكبر بانتظاري، بل بانتظارنا جميعا. عندما بدأت الحرب بدأت بالأحياء التي كنا نقطن فيها، بدأت بشراسة وبشكل لم نألف ولا حتى في أعنف أفلام هوليوود. أصبحنا نشعر بأن الموت تتربص بنا دوائره خلف كل جدار وخلف كل شجرة، بل وخلف كل برعم وزهرة. وكمثل مئات الآلاف من أبناء وطني أصبحنا نرى أن في الهجرة النجاة، خاصة بعد أن باءت جميع محاولاتنا في التنقل ضمن الأحياء بحثا عن الأمان بالفشل. بالطبع لم يكن قرارا سهلا. كيف سنغادر جنتنا؟ كيف سنودع ذكرياتنا في هذا البيت وفي هذا الحي؟ تلك الأشجار في صحن دارنا لمن سنتركها؟ ما هذه الخيانة؟ لقد عاشت معنا كما عاش معنا أبي وأمي، بل وشهدت أجيالا أكثر مما نعلم في هذا البيت. تلك الدهاليز والأدراج والقناطر المزخرفة والتفاصيل كافة، هل سنخونها برمتها ببساطة هكذا؟ الخشب قصة عشق. عندما تكون بعض الجدران مغطاة بالقطع الخشبية الصغيرة المزركشة، وعندما تكون الأسقف من الخشب، عندها ستكون هنالك علاقة أكيدة لمواد البناء مع تعلقنا وعشقنا للمكان. في بيتنا العربي القديم كان هناك لكل سقف حكاية، فكل سقف يختلف عن الآخر بعدد الأخشاب التي على شكل جذوع أشجار تغطيه، كما تختلف ألوانها ورسومها وأحجامها. لكل سقف حكاية جميلة وشعور أجمل. Now she lives in Turkey. Next, please. She had a new life in Turkey. She might came back to Aleppo for a visit and maybe to continue its life in her city Aleppo. Still, the orange tree seeds that her passed away younger brother planted in our grandfather's old house had grown in the ruins of the courtyard. She said that he tried a lot to grow something when he was alive, and finally he succeeded. Some people may choose not to come back. The memories are too cruel for them to be remembered, but many others had chosen to return despite the destruction. Abu Muhammad, next please. Abu Muhammad al-Shawwa, who owns a small barbecue restaurant located opposite the citadel of Aleppo in 2017. In 2017, he returned to his shop and started the barbecue in front of it, waiting to be able to raise enough money to restore it. He declares, "This is my place of livelihood and here I live, and I want to stay and continue in my city and hometown." Next, please. Yes, I'm going to talk fast. Time is flying. The destruction also has targeted the symbols of the cities. Those who know and visited Syria and traveled through it will notice that every historical monument that has been vandalized or targeted was used as one of the symbols of the city in which it is located. We can see to the right that this one of the participation at the sketchbook of Syria. Her name is Kinda. There are three sisters, Kinda, Maya, and Natin Ghannoum. They participated with us in Sketch of Syria. And you can see that above to the left, Deir ez-Zor, it was known by her suspended bridge, Aleppo by her citadel, Homs by her Mosque of Al-Walid, Khalid ibn al-Walid, and Palmyra by her Arc de Triomphe. And when they entered each city, they were targeted. These monuments were targeted. The first thing ISIS did was bombing in 2013 when they entered Deir ez-Zor, is bombing the suspended bridge which connected the two banks of the Euphrates River together. This bridge is one of the most important landmarks in the city of Deir ez-Zor. It was the second suspended bridge in the world, after a bridge like it located in the south of France. The militant and ISIS, under the slogan of blowing up the pagan monuments, targeted the city of Palmyra, where the antiquities of the city dated back to the Roman era. So they detonated its arch, Victory, and the Temple of Baal, claiming that they are seeking to raise the banner of Islam. But what these mercenaries were aiming at was systematically sabotaging the cultural heritage and national identity. Otherwise, how can they justify their deliberate bombing of the minarets of the Umayyad Mosque in Aleppo and burn it, and why they demolish the Islamic religious buildings and mosque? Next, please. Fastly, I'm going to talk about how Syrians are related to their cultural heritage. You can see on the screen some of the sketchbooks from the initiative Sketch for Syria. This initiative was initiated by the University of IUV, University of Venice, in collaboration with UNESCO. I was the coordinator and the project manager of this project, co-managing, and by the UN. And we had made a competition. You can search on it as Sketch for Syria and Global. It was a global call for architects, artists, and innovative thinkers to imagine post-war reconstruction. We received 130
Luna? Unfortunately, this...
I think that we lost Luna.
Yeah, it's the case when internet connection in Syria in some places is not stable.
To summarize it at the end, I don't know how many slides Luna has until the end.
Not many. Hopefully she will be able to come back and continue. So she was almost nearly at the end, so maybe we can continue with Ms. Rachel and then come back to Luna after. She's back. Luna?
Yes, I'm sorry, I don't know why this had happened. Anyway,
Perfect. Happy to.
Two or three more minutes. Yes, I was talking about Sketch for Syria. You can see from these examples on the screen how people are related to their heritage. These are young architects and young professionals, and also Syria. They are inside Syria and outside Syria. To the left is the cover of each sketchbook. It was distributed around the world, and people all around the world participated in this initiative. And the results really show us it was the best evidence of the attachment of Syrians with their heritage, and witnessing that the way out of identity destabilization is through the restoration and rehabilitation of this heritage. Next, please. It was clear within this initiative the Syrians' attachment to their national cultural heritage, from the 45% of drawings contained in the returned sketchbooks that explicitly referred to cultural heritage. This indicates the extent to which the Syrian is attached to his history, especially within the scientific and cultural community. In another experience, I am an expert for the UN ESCWA for the National Agenda for the Future of Syria, NAFS. I've started with them since 2013 with the Committee of the Reconstruction and Sustainable Development, and I had proposed for them to add the cultural heritage as one of the main elements that will help to gain back the identity of Syrian. And to convince them, I did prepare a study regarding the development of the cultural heritage sector in Syria, within which I explained how cultural heritage works for preserving national unity and identity by interfering the results of the pioneer experiment of the Directorate General of Antiquities and the Museum DGAM, and raising awareness of its employees, regardless of their political, religious, or sectarian affiliation, about the importance of preserving the Syrian cultural heritage, which is considered the main container of the shared history between people. The DGAM, Directorate General of Antiquities, and the museum was able to save many of its museum antique collectible and many archaeological sites after the employees of the DGAM protected these collections and sites in cooperation with the local community, which was educated by the employees themselves. The idea of excluding the tangible cultural heritage from the conflict was spread among all parties to protect it and preserve it. This study led to the formation of the contentment that cultural heritage will be an important part of resolving the Syrian crisis, and that it can play an important role in shaping the promising future of Syria. Next, please. As a result, the preservation, restoration,
I think that we are running out of time, and my
we lost Luna.
yeah, we lost Luna, and my my suggestion is, if we have a time during discussion to complete this extremely interesting and important study. In fact, I have been guilty for pushing Luna as an architect to do ethnographic study, being convinced that architectural conservation cannot go on without understanding not only community, because it's really extremely different to explain how do we interpret the community approach or the approach of the collective, but personal stories through ethnographic studies. And it always means that the researcher will be emotionally immersed into the context. So I think it's healthy for the conservation architect to become so close to the personal stories and these feelings and to understand that. So the other segment of this presentation that was presented in Sketch for Syria is also extremely important, showing how this mental mapping or mapping of memoryscapes is the way of perpetuating cultural memory when usually when it is not physically approachable by those who have attachment to certain sites. When the sites are not approachable physically and cultural memory persists and it's perpetuated through different kind of the maintaining the memoryscapes. So I would like to ask you kindly, Mohammed, to introduce Dr. Rachel Killian and to continue with our presentations. Thank you, Luna. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very much, Luna. It was really very touching intervention. And thank you. Our following speaker is Dr. Rachel Killian. She's a senior lecturer in law at the School of Law, Queen's University Belfast, where she was the deputy director of the Human Rights Centre between 2016 and 2019. Her research centers around victims' rights, transitional justice, and hierarchies of harm, predominantly in Southeast Asia. Her first book, Victims, Atrocity, and International Criminal Justice, Lessons from Cambodia, was published by Routledge in 2018. She has published in the Journal of International Criminal Justice, the International Journal of Transitional Justice, and the International Journal of Human Rights, amongst others. Dr. Killian, thank you very much for being with us today, and you have the floor. You can share the screen.
Thank you. Yes, I think I can share it here. You can see it okay?
Yes, thank you.
Perfect. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to be here with you today. In this presentation, I want to share some reflections from a research project I conducted with my colleagues, Dr. Dacia Viego-Rose, who's here today, but also Robin Hickey and Luke Moffat from Queen's University, and Farina So and Vanara Orn from the Documentation Centre of Cambodia. So this project explored the destruction of cultural heritage in the context of historical mass atrocities, and centered in particular the experience of the Cham Islamic minority group in Cambodia. Now, the Cham are one of Cambodia's largest minority groups, and during the 1970s, they were subjected to crimes against humanity of persecution and genocide at the hands of the Khmer Rouge regime. So in this presentation, I want to reflect on the harms that were perpetrated against the Cham's cultural heritage and their collective identity during that period. And then I'll consider what their experience, both of harm and repair, might teach us about the possibilities of integrated heritage reconstruction in post-trauma social and economic recovery. So when the Khmer Rouge came to power in 1975, they quite quickly sought to eradicate signifiers of difference amongst the population. So communities were required to abandon their expressions of religion and culture and to dedicate themselves to the revolution. And this was under threat of re-education, torture, or death. For the Cham, this policy of forced assimilation resulted in the destruction of various religious and cultural significant buildings and objects, including an estimated 130 mosques, their religious texts, and their traditional modes of dress. And the impact of these policies were profound. The attacks on their buildings were experienced as an attack on the life of their community, as Luna was evoking a moment ago. And as expressed by one interview, it's like they hold our mosque hostage, or it's like they arrest our children, they feel suffering. So it shows the emotional pain through the loss of physical items. And the group also endured attacks on their traditional way of living. So communities of all backgrounds during the Khmer Rouge were subjected to phases of forced movement, but the Cham would find themselves deliberately separated and uprooted from the micro-societies in which they were accustomed to live in Cambodia. And so this process of separation had a real impact on their ability to transmit and retain their community and identity. And that's particularly the case because the Cham were not a group with substantial textual culture. That's not how they transmit culture. So as expressed by one interviewee, the Khmer Rouge cut off and lessened relationships between families. And at the time, it was very hard, both in terms of religious practice and personal life. So the Cham famously, in several cases, tried to resist their treatment, and there are a number of armed rebellions by the Cham during the regime. But resistance to this process was met with violence and death. And over the course of the Khmer Rouge regime, their policy with regards to the Cham changed from one of assimilation to one of extermination. And this was brought about through purges, mass arrests, and killings. And they particularly targeted leaders and teachers in the Cham community. So as one interview expressed it, it seemed that they targeted educated or those who knew about Islam. And what Dacia and I argue in our paper is that the result of these policies reflect what has been framed by Bernadette Atouane as community destruction, meaning the process where a community is deprived of the social and emotional ties that define and sustain them. So through the loss of their buildings, the displacement of their communities, the censoring of their language, the outlawing of their cultural practice, and the deliberate targeting of their leaders, the Khmer Rouge harmed the cultural heritage of the Cham in ways that continue to be felt to this day. So the Cham's experience highlights that reparation in the aftermath of genocide is a process rather than a one-off event. And it can happen in diverse and unexpected ways. So for the Cham, for a long time after the regime, they had to repair and rebuild their lives without intervention, without assistance, and without official reparation from the state. So in the years that followed the fall of the Khmer Rouge in 1979, members of the community returned to where they were from, tried to find each other if possible, and slowly began the process of rebuilding their homes and their communal property. So as described on the slide, we tried to build our life with our bare hands and tried to build a hut and then build a sorav close by. So this process was slow. It was facilitated by domestic legal reforms around property rights and freedom of religion. And in time, as the country opened up through international financial aid from a range of donors. So this facilitated the rebuilding of physical property, but the Cham really struggled to rebuild their sense of collective identity and their history. So the loss of their religious leaders was really keenly felt and expressed to us, as reflected in the second quote. Imagine those that were educated left and left only those who didn't know. And this is like living in the darkness. So 40 years then after the Khmer Rouge, we have the tribunal known as the Extraordinary Chambers in the Courts of Cambodia, or the Khmer Rouge Tribunal. So this was established to prosecute the senior leaders and those most responsible for the crimes perpetrated during the regime. And in addition to finding the regime's senior leaders guilty of the genocide and persecution of the Cham, the tribunal opened up a possibility for judicial reparations for their losses. Now, due to the Khmer Rouge's unique structure, which I won't get into, reparations are predominantly proposed and implemented by civil society. And in relation to the CHAM, the tribunal recognized 2 reparation projects. So there was a community media project, which was 2 films, an exhibition, a website, and a blog, and then a mobile exhibition, which discussed their experiences alongside the experience of the ethnic Vietnamese. So a kind of minority rights type exhibition. So these were framed as projects that guaranteed non-repetition. So to acknowledge their harm, document their experience, and raise awareness, and thereby promote non-discrimination moving forward. And these are important goals, but in our view, these projects wouldn't be considered as having addressed the ongoing harms expressed to us by the CHAM. So in particular, the ongoing impact of that community destruction, which I highlighted a moment ago, remains largely without redress. And it doesn't appear that either project was deeply grounded in the expressions of needs of the CHAM communities. So this came through in our interviews, which took place after these projects. So we found that requests for assistance in restoring and rebuilding religious buildings were made repeatedly, but they were explicitly also linked to the identity preservation that I mentioned as having fallen under attack. So you can see that on the slides. It's build a meeting hall, the resting place, the museum, inform the young generation, bring the legacy of the people who died during the regime. So for them, their identity was now caught up in this particular experience as well. And our interviews often discuss the continued loss of cultural anchors and their sources of information about the past. So one interviewee said, we try to research, but we have limited resources. We need support from other organizations to provide training to our teachers. And what I would suggest is that the CHAM's experience of cultural loss and repair draws our attention to the need for reparations that are expansive, that are culturally attuned, and that are grounded in the specific experiences and wishes of the communities. So responding to the range of interlinked harms that can result from the targeting of cultural heritage, we need something that's holistic and something that can mirror the intergenerational and ongoing nature of the harm. So this might involve multiple iterations or a spectrum of interventions rather than a one-off process of repair. And to link in with the theme of the workshop, I think this broader approach makes it possible to pursue some of the UN SDGs. So if we acknowledge the value of heritage in a holistic way and build projects that repair through engagement with communities, we can think about SDG goals 3, good health and well-being, 4, quality education, and we can contribute to others, because research on heritage in relation to both well-being and education shows how effective this kind of approach can be if communities are given the power to participate in conservation and interpretation of their heritage. And what our research with the CHAM also demonstrated, that when it's appropriately responded to, cultural heritage can be a resource when a society is recovering or a community is recovering, because it enables this retention of dignity and well-being. So based on our case study, we identified 5 concluding suggestions. So first, that identifying and repairing the harm done by violence against heritage should be viewed as potentially requiring long-term and intangible methods. So harm is not a one-off act of violence, it's a process. And that was what was experienced by the CHAM. So any repair would necessarily also have to be a process rather than a specific solution. Second, the CHAM's disenchantment with the reparations they have received highlights the need for genuine consultation and engagement with victimized communities that is ongoing and throughout the design of any reparation. Third, those responsible for reparations need to look beyond the loss of physical and consider the full diverse range of harms that may extend beyond the directly victimized generation. And the loss of that heritage needs to be contextualized in the range of moral and emotional and physical harm that was experienced by the CHAM and by other groups subjected to this type of mass violence. So these harms might be connected to the loss of physical items, but also extend far beyond them. Fourth, that reparations should be understood as a process encompassing diverse, specific and non-specific interventions. So in the CHAM's case, we heard a lot about quite straightforward, non-specific legal reforms around property and freedom of religion, but actually played a key role in their recovery in the aftermath of the regime. And then finally, that the intergenerational challenges of loss of heritage should be recognized, and the need to facilitate connection between those that were harmed, their ancestors that they may feel a loss of connection to, and then their own descendants who they wish to impart this information to. So the CHAM experience showed us that the alternative is that the harm caused by the loss of cultural heritage continues to echo through the generations. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Killian, and thank you for this wonderful research that you did. Probably it requested a lot of strength and emotions invested in it. I have enjoyed reading your paper, and I've learned a lot. So it's fascinating how it is one of the most the best cases to present what is the power of heritage in destroying a group of people. Agnes Heller once said that whenever you want to destroy a group of people, only biological means are not sufficient. A group of people has never been destroyed through the biological means. But if you pushed the cultural memory into oblivion, a group cannot survive. So all these like costumes, dresses, hairdresses, religious books, the leaders of the group, all the symbols of identity that were the targets of destruction in order to destroy the group, to annihilate the group, are so perfectly presented in your case study. And it is also one of those cases that present that heritage is really, especially in post-trauma recovery, much more about intangible attributes of the values than about the tangible values, and how these sort of transmission and translation is done through totally different media and a sort of perpetuation of cultural memory. So thank you very much for this extremely important presentation. And now I would like to ask Mr. Mohammed to introduce to us our next three speakers. In the meantime, I would like to invite the audience and the panelists, if you have any question or comment to any of the presentations, please write them in a chat or a question and answers option that you have at the bottom of your screens, so that we can manage our discussion at the end of the webinar. So thank you very much. Mohammed, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you indeed, Dr. Rachel, and thank you, Amra, for reminding our audience to not hesitate to share their questions, and the panelists as well. So the following and last presentation for our webinar today is entitled Historical Trauma on Cultural Heritage in Occupied Palestinian Territory. It will be presented by three speakers. The first, Mrs. Marilena Collia, she is a psychologist and has a master's degree in environment and behavior. For the past 5 years, she's been working in the humanitarian sector in fields of mental health and psychological support and protection. She is currently working in occupied territories with Première Urgence Internationale in Palestine in projects centered on the preservation and response to the different coercive environment factors in the occupied West Bank and Gaza Strip. Marilena has keen interest in psychological response to adversity that are alternative to trauma, like resilience and adversity-activated growth. Our second speaker is Ms. Nada Ambatawi. She's an architect currently working with Première Urgence Internationale in the Gaza Strip. as a protection officer to support the organization positioning within the protection sector in Gaza Strip and help start the protection mainstreaming efforts within the Première Agence Internationale in Occupied Palestinian Territories mission, including the incorporation of intersecting issues like age, gender, diversity, disability, etc., across different programming. And for the last 4 years, she's worked in close collaboration with Première Agence Internationale team and international experts in following up the progress of their projects. The third and last speaker will be Ms. Rafif Al-Masi. Ms. Rafif is an architect and holds a master's degree in sustainable building technologies. She's currently working with Première Agence Internationale, the same in Gaza Strip, to raise community awareness of Palestinian cultural heritage and advocate for the cultural rights of Palestinians. For the last 2 years, she's worked with academic, private, and civil society partners to develop an integrated approach for the socio-economic development program for the protection of Palestinian cultural heritage. Please, Marilena, you have the floor. We will share the presentation.
Great. Thanks a lot, Mohammed, for the presentation, and big thanks to all the speakers previously. I think it has been a very interesting discussion so far. So if you could please share the presentation from your side.
Yes, one moment, please. We are doing.
Ah, sorry, I cannot. Yeah,
Thank
I can
you.
see it now. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you.
So thanks a lot, and we're very pleased to be here today with my colleagues Rafif and Nada to present briefly our paper on historical trauma and cultural heritage in occupied Palestinian territory, and specifically in the Gaza Strip. I will first briefly give an overview of the theoretical background of our paper, and then my colleague Nada will provide us an overview of the current context in Gaza, which I think it's very prevalent and very interesting. And lastly, Rafif will present how we're using this theoretical background in the context of Gaza through our very specific and innovative approach using cultural heritage called Intical. Next slide, please. So I want to start this discussion talking a little bit about historical trauma and how we are trying to re-articulate it to make more sense in the context of indigenous studies and focusing a little bit more on local population and communities. When we're talking about historical trauma, we're basically describing the effects of collective adverse experiences on a specific group of people over different generations. I think, unfortunately, talking about historical trauma in Palestine is quite relevant because Palestine has been under huge adversity and violence for the last 75 years at least. So it's an issue that really is important to be addressed, I think. And when we're talking about historical trauma, we're definitely not referring to any kind of personal trauma, any kind of psychological disorder. I think, unfortunately, the word trauma has been misused greatly in psychology, in my field, and in general in the post-colonial field. Trauma has been used to pathologize the native experience, and this is not what we're trying to do at all. We're trying to use the term in order to spark a discussion about native experience and not to pathologize their experiences at all. So I think this is something important to highlight. Next slide, please. So in order to reframe historical trauma, we are reflecting on a trauma grid model proposed by Papadopoulos. Basically, what the trauma grid model proposes is that there are 3 different responses to what we call trauma, but the word trauma here can be replaced with adversity. So the 3 different responses are negative responses, psychological injury, which is what we tend to talk about mostly when we hear the word trauma. We think psychological disorder, we think mental health disorder, but there are also the neutral responses, which is what we call resilience. And finally, positive responses, which is a concept called adversity activated development. So in our programming in the Gaza Strip, we wanted to focus on how to build on the neutral and positive responses to historical trauma. And the way we think is the best and what we have found so far, sorry, previous slide, is through cultural heritage. So I will give now the floor to my colleague Nada to discuss a little bit about the current situation in the Gaza Strip, and then Rafif will take the floor. Thanks a lot. The floor is yours, Nada.
Thank you, Marlena. Thank you, everyone. This June 2021 marked the 54 years of Israeli occupation and 14 years of blockade in Gaza Strip. If we can show the next slide, please. The situation of Gazans continue to get worse and worse every day, not only due to the Israeli occupation and the comprehensive blockade on Gaza Strip, but also due to the internal Palestinian political division. Israeli divisions started to reduce the electricity supply to the Gaza Strip, which put the de facto authorities in their situation. The severe shortage in electricity supply impacts all Gazans aspects of life, such as health, water and sanitation, agriculture, and education. Since March 2021, the Palestinian Prime Minister declared the state of emergency in Palestine to contain the spread of COVID-19 after the first cases were confirmed in Bethlehem City. The capacity of the Palestinian health system to cope with the spread of the pandemic is severely impaired. And the situation particularly severe in Gaza, where the health system has been undermined by ongoing conflict between Hamas and Israel, the Israeli blockade, the internal Palestinian division, the chronic power defect, and the shortages in specialized staff, drug, and equipment. Next slide, please. In May 2021, the tension in East Jerusalem has been escalating, centering on Sheikh Jarrah and the Old City areas. This leads to increase the tension between the Gazans and the Israeli army. And in 11 days, between May 10th and until May 19th, 2021, Israeli forces carried out hundreds of airstrikes and shelling on Gaza Strip. According to the latest update by Ministry of Health, as it's shown, there was 256 deaths and 2,000 injuries in the Palestinian sides. Also, we have in the highest of the escalation, 113,000 internally displaced people who sought shelter and protection at UNRWA schools or with hosting communities. Now, up to 8,500 internally displaced people remain with host families and in 2 UNRWA schools. According to the statistics, an estimated 16,257 housing units sustained some degrees of damage, as multiple water and sanitation facilities and infrastructure, 58 education facilities, 9 hospitals, and 19 primary health care centers. Next slide, please. The charts here shows that 66 out of the 256 deaths is children, and we have about 1,128 houses who has severely damaged, and 15,129 houses who suffers major or minor damages. Next. Next, please. These figures shared by OCHA shows the numbers of affected surfaces and houses in Gaza after the escalation. You can here notice the affected healthcare centers, the severely damaged or minor damaged houses, and the education facilities damages. Next. We have here some photos in the next slides that shows illustrate the scale of destruction of housing and some healthcare centers during May 2021 escalation. In the next slide also, and the next. These are severely damaged houses. This is a healthcare center called the Rimal Clinic, who was also affected by the airstrikes during the escalation. Now I'll give the stage to my colleague Rafif to talk about our program Intiqal. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nada. Hi everyone, I'm Rafif and I'm going to present our socio-economic program Intiqal. Well, actually, my colleague Marilena, she talked about historic trauma, and I would like to start talking about the practical implementation of the theoretical framework around HT and cultural heritage in Gaza Strip. PUI, please, next slide. PUI has launched an Intiqal program in December 2017. Intiqal program is a youth-led initiative, and it's a socio-economic program led by youth generally, and it leverages on the protection of cultural heritage by involving communities and local civil stakeholders and encouraging their interaction on archaeological sites here in Gaza Strip. Next, please. Maybe in Arabic, you know, Arabic speaker, that intiqal is a term that corresponds to transition or transmission in English. The term has been carefully chosen by youth in order to express the moving forward, not only from maintaining Palestinian archaeological site and tangible heritage, but also to benefiting from the cultural heritage socially, economically, and mentally, let's say. For example, we aim at moving from past and present to brighter future, from individual to resilient communities, from emergency needs to self-resilience. Next, please. In this figure, you can see the framework of Intiqal. You can see that we have main activities and main components such as cultural heritage conservation, environment, social and economic development. But at the core of this intervention, we can see that the protection of both heritage and people affected by the conflict stands at the core of Intiqal intervention. Next. Well, actually, maybe you know, my colleague Nada talked briefly about the situation, the most recent situation in Gaza Strip, but you may not know that we have a lot of archaeological sites in Gaza Strip, not only important in our region, but also in Middle East. I'm going to mention that. We have been working in two sites since December 2017. The first site you can see in the next slide. It's Tal Ahmed, or what is known as the St. Hilary Monastery. Next, please. It is one of the most important monastery, not only in Palestine, but also in the Levant and the Middle East. And we started our intervention by implementing emergency stabilization measures. And now we are improving our intervention to go through development level. The next location is the Byzantine Church in Jabalia. It was affected by the last escalation, minor effect, but it was affected anyway. Next slide, please. This is an aerial photo for the two sites in Gaza Strip. We have been working in two places within three components. Next. The first component is about protection and restoration of those two sites. The second component is the capacity building and training program. The third component is promotion of Palestinian cultural heritage in Gaza Strip. Next. This photo maybe shows how youth professionals are working and training in the archaeological sites, and the efforts that have been put on restoring the site was by youth, whether they are professional, expert, or graduates from local universities. Next, please. The capacity building program aim at, let's say, involving of youth professionals in preserving their monument while strengthening their skills and capacities in the preservation of cultural heritage and encouraging job opportunities. The third component, let's say that we worked on the promotion of Palestinian cultural heritage through different ways and through different activities, and it let's say that it's a community engagement oriented method. Next, please. So we have many activities such as site visits, online or actual awareness raising sessions, events. We conducted many events and competitions such as drawing competition for architects and children. And we also made some communities activities like making mosaic panel. And we are continuing our activities by improving the involving in communities in archaeological sites. You can go next, maybe. We have some photos to share. This photo shows site visits. Next. Awareness raising session at universities or local association. And we also conduct voluntary days for youth who would like to be part in archaeological sites and archaeological restoration. Next, please. A drawing competition, and those are samples of winning drawings in the competition that was conducted to draw a scene from the St. Hilary Monastery. Next. And we have many community activities such as a group of communities who work together to produce a mosaic panel about the St. Hilary Monastery. Next. Okay, re-intiqal, as you see that we have many activities, and those activities has not only a good impact on the archaeological sites, but also on people who were engaged in our activities. Actually, in Intiqal, we promote and care for creating and running safe spaces in protected archaeological site, which Gazans, girls, youth, people, family can gather and make a concrete action and express their fears, hope in a protective environment while developing their resilience following violent or traumatic experiences. Next, please. I would like also to talk about our upcoming activities, more related to heritage and well-being. BUI started to collaborate with Dr. Faisal, who is a community researcher and public history at Manchester Metropolitan University. Our study now is that we started this study to know how heritage practices can positively impact on individuals and community well-being. All Intiqal beneficiaries, including workers, students, and volunteers, visitors, will take part in this study. Results of this study will be used after we finish it for educational purposes, researches, organizational, strategic development purposes. Next, please. And in order to promote positive or neutral outcomes of historic trauma in Palestine, as my colleague Marlena, she explained at the beginning, we are planning to implement a specific activity, and we just call it study on mosaic making. And this activity is just proposed, and it will be developed and implemented with community. The community will be the consultant for us in developing this activity. It will be mainly about linking cultural heritage symbols, so whether if it was tangible symbol or intangible, with the historical trauma. And we are going to prepare decks of cards to, it's kind of game, but it will be developed by community members. Next, please. Well, actually, Intiqal 2030 is a part of BUI's effort to advocate for the role of culture for sustainable development. This program contributes to monitoring, collecting, analyzing quantitative and qualitative data in the field of culture, increasing the visibility of culture for the implementation of 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, ensuring that no one is left behind. As you know, we work to achieve sustainable development goals, and we care for each goal and try to match it in as cross-cutting issues in our intervention. Next, please. Thank you for your attention. I would like to mention that all of our program was supported by UK Cultural Protection Fund that was funded by British Council in partnership with the Department of Digital Culture, Media and Sport and with Alif Foundation as well. And our activities were collaboratively implemented with the French School in Jerusalem for archaeology, local association, local universities here in Gaza Strip, and the Palestinian Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities. Thank you very much.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for these updates from Gaza and for all the work that you do. I have to confess frankly to everyone, when I was looking for the psychologist working in this integration of cultural heritage, reconstruction, or work with the cultural heritage into the recovery of community, it was pretty hard to find someone, although everyone talks about the importance of cultural heritage for the trauma processing, healing, resilience, etc. So then I found that in Gaza there is a group of people that works on this project that is so important for this critical heritage discourse. And thank you very much for that. So now we have a pretty limited time for discussion with a lot of comments that we received and questions. And if you allow me, I will start with the questions in order as we receive them. So a first question that we received is to Lachlan Kelly from Juliana Strugan. She asked, it is then defended that physical change / adaptation would become more acceptable from the conservation perspective? ? I hope, Lachlan, that you are ready to answer this question. And I also would like to ask you, after answering the question, to, as you sent one comment to, I assume, 3 last presentations, especially this one from Gaza, just to inform us about your comment.
Okay, Amra, I'll try to answer the question, which is actually impossible to answer, but anyway. What I find interesting is that as conservation, we can call it that in a general way, has become mainstreamed in many places, become part, if you like, of the contemporary architectural problematique, then conservation has become replaced by adaptive reuse. And I think that kind of eliding of ideas between conservation and adaptation is almost inevitable in every project, but it's not always helpful in thinking about it. And that's why I try to distinguish between transmission and translation, because they are, to my mind, integral parts of a single process, but they need to be considered individually. And I think conservation theory has some distance to go still before it actually grasps the business of continuity and what's required to bring cultural heritage along with us as we change. The comment that I made, I'm shifting ground here very quickly, but I'm very struck by something which I certainly remember from my early years working with communities. And it's the difficulty of people understanding or sensing that there's a reward for their work. That it's a big struggle for people to keep going, for people who are encouraging people in community to keep working against the tide, as it were. And people need to feel that there's a reward there. They need to get a sense of achievement in a different time frame from the ones which development agencies or international bodies actually apply. So it's a question I have in my mind, really, as to how one reconciles these things, how one brings together the bottom up and the top down in the specific events that people are working through, in the specific projects. Because sometimes, I'm sorry I'm going on for too long now, but sometimes one can feel, I think, that what one is doing is a very small contribution in a very large problem. So I'm wondering how people sense that. How do you keep hope alive in the midst of continuing difficulty? Sorry.
Do you want someone to answer your question, or it is just some kind of a rhetoric question, or a question some kind of a field of thought? And
well, if someone can answer it, I would be delighted. I've learned so much listening to these presentations today. So, but I keep on at the back of my mind, keep saying, okay, how does one keep going in continuing difficulty? What rewards are there? Particularly where people have been very traumatized, and I'm sorry, I apologize for my use of that word, but their environments and their social organization very often disrupted, you know, and their authority structures actually displaced, their populations partly displaced, and a loss of community nexus, if I can call it that. So I'm just wondering, how do people deal with those sorts of things? Do they come to the fore, or are they just there in the background all the time? So,
thank you. So maybe we can ask our colleagues from Gaza to answer that. I can be one of those who has, suffered this trauma and living in that. Luna as well, etc. So, but at the moment, probably Rafif and Marilena and Nada are those who can give us the best answer.
Well, actually, from my side, I think that we should be realistic at the first place, because once you understand your feeling, you can know what you are going to do next. So I think the best thing to keep hope ongoing is by being engaged, and with generally with anything, but if you are engaged with and involved and getting to be socialized with other people, this really helps after all of our experience. So and after that, you can increase your level of engagement with different things by maybe being just a volunteer in many fields, to be more involved. You should develop your skills, and you should focus on this thing. This actually gives you hope to continue and to think more about not only for your future, but also for your country and for your community and people. So I think we just give them the start to think in different way, to be involved in different things, and they can continue after that. They can see the whole vision, and they can choose where they can continue. But we should give them the beginning of the hope is the start, the engagement with the places and with the activity, and people after that can find themselves.
So thank you so much. I think that culture is a tool of survival in these horrible times, and it gives some kind of a sense to the human beings that are struggling. All these attacks to the humanity that they represent. We have one comment from Sonia Ibrahim, who is with us. She is a Syrian, and she said, "My answer is block the trauma and move on. as much as this is research, but it is our reality. I think the sense of community and the reward will be from them, yeah, so that's I have copied it 2 times to my, I think that in these times when community is under the pressure of conflict, there are 2 instincts that are born. One is the need for the establishing the thread of continuity, and the other is a need for the community. So there is not a time to discuss about that, but a wonderful question and wonderful sort of note by you, Lachlan. Thank you. Now I'm going on with a question to Magdalena. The question is, how can authenticity be assessed in the case of a reconstructed city such as Warsaw? Did the after-conflict reconstruction was considered in a specific conflict context? Magdalena, over to you.
Thank you so much, Amra. It's not an easy one, I have to say. And if you could please repeat the second part of the question, because I don't know whether I understood correctly. So if you could please repeat it for me again.
Did the after-conflict reconstruction was the after-conflict reconstruction considered in a specific conflict context? Was the after-conflict reconstruction considered in a specific conflict?
Okay, let's, to be honest, the Warsaw case was an exceptional inscription at that time. So the problem was that, of course, the issues regarding the authenticity and authenticity were raised during the evaluation of the nomination, and there were a lot of disputes regarding the fact that some experts raised the argument that this is a rebuilt part of the city, which and rebuilt monuments, and for this reason, where's authenticity to the substance of the monument, right? So the whole discussion was not an easy one, and it started to get from this inscription evolving, and a lot of ideas came up, and then we have this Nara document on the authenticity, you remember, and to be honest, at the end, the committee and ICOMOS itself decided that the authenticity will, and please let me just get back to you with a certain quotation, which I have it in here somewhere, that the authenticity lays oh, maybe I will not find it right now, but the fact was that it was not in the monuments itself, but in the whole project, and then that the desire of the people was so unexceptional, and the large part of the city was reconstructed in a very precise and specific way. When it comes to the documentation that was recovered after the war, and that was basically the fact that the city was inscribed on this exceptional basis to the World Heritage List. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this answer, and I hope that the person who raised the question is satisfied with the answer. We unfortunately do not know the name of our colleague, Now we have the Adil Abdallah, who comments, engaging the people in revival of heritage at post-trauma times is much successful whenever people feel that the heritage is their own property. Despite heritage conservation is not politically or ideology driven, but this is the simple gauge of urban democracy or autocracy. In many countries, people are just observant of the reconstruction efforts. What is really true. In contrary to others, where the process had solely functioned by people. Failed urban democracy diffuse any effectiveness of social mobilization of the public. I do value the concurrent UNESCO club's moves, which restore and retain the heritage to the common. Then we have the comment by Sadet Jundoktu. Thank you very much for your all presentations. Reconstruction should think together social and economic life. I don't know if some of the panelists would like to comment on these two comments, to comment back on these two comments. Maybe Dr. Zaki.
It's a long question, so I cannot remember everything said in it.
Read it again. It's more comment than a question.
Mm.
Is engaging the people in revival of heritage at post-trauma times is much successful whenever people feel that the heritage is their own property. Then Adil Abdallah gives some kind of two examples, that there are some examples of recovery of heritage when people are totally excluded from the process, the people, the community, those that the heritage belong to. And the other options when people are those who manage the process, who in fact inform, who are the agents of the process. So that is, I just invite you to comment this kind of situation and what is the ongoing trend, how it is solved. And also we have another comment that reconstruction should bring together social and economic life, or think together about social and economic life.
Perhaps the best way of answering this question is through example and or examples, I should say. I don't know if the person who asked the question, listened to what I presented on the Sudan case, for example. The Sudan case, in fact, was it's like these museums became, the places where people meet. And now how, on one side, it was really successful because, people, these have become cultural hubs where people could share their heritage. They celebrate their shared heritage. They have events. They have so there is this dimension also of everything related to their music, for example. It's beyond the physical aspect of the historic museums themselves. So they were sharing cooking. They were sharing songs. So that brought people together. So in a way, the process of that experiment, I should say, or that experience, helped bring people together. And I'm aware of the fact that, of course, not everybody came to these museums, but at least, those who were interested and they felt that this is part of their identity, especially that these are ethnographic museums. So even objects were part of the community collection. I remember I was there at one of the events, and people were even donating, their historic objects to the museum, something like 100 years old or something like that. So I think that is a good example of how these people who were not speaking to each other come together, celebrate. So heritage became a tool, and its preservation in that sense of the intangible in this case have become, you know, a tool for people coming together. Now, there are of course certain you know, let's say layers of society that were not engaged. Now it's the role of the in this case, I mean, using this example again, in this case, they were trying to see the methods of engagement. So, for example, they were reaching out to schools. There were really attractive programs within the museum field in that particular, you know, area, geographic area. How we could bring people, and the kids can bring their parents, etc. So there are ways of engagement in this case. Of course, everything we speak about is context related. So I'm just using one example. To me, it was a successful one, but perhaps, you know, other people can comment using other examples. I mean, this is what comes to my mind to answer this question, and or that comment, if that helps. I hope that gave a certain, you know, dimension to what the person was commenting on.
Thank you so much. I hope that it's satisfactory answer, and it's excellent example. Now I would like to ask Luna to just the focus, because there are 3 questions for her and comments at the same time. First one is by Malak Al-Khaden, who says, "Thank you so much, Dr. Luna, for sharing such a touching personal story and showing the art done by youth to reconnect with our heritage and present it to the world." It's a command. Then we have Mohammed Mektar, who says, "Thank you very much for all presentations, especially Mrs. Raja Bonsiria. My question to her is about the possible opportunities that could be in the heart of the atrocious situation of the Syrian cultural heritage currently. How do you see the possibility of building and developing local Syrian heritage professionalism with the heritage skill draining that heritage sector has suffered in the years of the Syrian crisis? What could the international audience do to help, and what are the possibilities to get involved to help the Syrian colleagues?" So that is, let's say, one set of questions. And the other question is by Rachel Killian, who says, "I would love to hear more from Luna about the connection between natural heritage, such as the trees she mentioned, and cultural heritage. In particular, would she have any reflections on the role of restoring natural heritage in recovery from violence?" So, Luna, you can choose what to answer and summarize. We are now just at this moment out of the time, but
yes, I know.
Discussion, whoever wants to continue, we have more questions, and I suggest to stay a little bit more to continue the discussion.
Regarding the issue of how we can preserve our cultural heritage, locally and internationally, there's lots of initiatives that are happening now that has started a little bit some time now, not only just started. And some of them are from Germany, some of them from the around cities, some of them are personal initiatives. They worked on documenting. This is one of the very important tools regarding the restoration, rehabilitation of the cultural heritage. the documentation of these of all the cultural heritage that is inside Syria. They are work on collecting old photos, archived photos all around the world, and there's several projects that are happening, and also there's I think several initiatives and NGOs that have been launched in Syria, for Syria and outside Syria also, by Syrian and by non-Syrian, to protect and preserve the cultural heritage. Among them is my colleague Lama Aboud. We are both at ICOMOS International, and we are working on establishing the National Committee of ICOMOS in Syria. She is from Homs, and she had worked to establish a non-profit organization called Turathuna. It is especially aimed to preserve the cultural heritage of Homs. And she had started its work just last year, and they started with documenting and making visits for specialists and raising awareness, and also skills and let's say how we say it, courses for enhancing how we can document, how we can make les relevés, documenting the building itself and the situation, the dangerous situation of it, and so on. And of course, the door is open for all kinds of initiatives that really aim to want to restore and help to restore and preserve the cultural heritage in Syria. And of course, the people who lives in these areas and used to live and they wanted to come back, they are one of the very important elements and to help rebuild. Now, regarding the second question of the nature, the Islamic fabric and cultural heritage that is still living. We have, a vivid cultural heritage inside these old cities. And, at each house, there's a courtyard with plants, with trees. And it is very, very, it is the place of where the families gathers, the children's place. I used to play a lot in my grandfather's courtyard. And it was the most pleasant time that you can spend. You didn't need any gym or club or anything. You are with your cousin just playing at this very wide courtyard. Inside this courtyard, there's of course the trees, and you cannot really see a courtyard without trees and without plants. So wherever you want to restore the building itself, the stones, you need to restore also the plant trees, the grape, we have the apricots, all these traditional trees that used to be located inside it. Also, we have outside the natural cultural heritage, for example, outside Damascus, we have a very known area that is called Al-Ghouta. Al-Ghouta is one of the places that is farms and lots of trees, and Damascus get its fruits and vegetables from it. And during the crisis, so many trees were cut, and so many trees were destroyed. Lots of land has lost their farms, their people, and it is very important to restore the memory of this, because any Syrian or Damascene person, he had memories and very delighted memories, because during springs it's the time of go to Al Ghouta and stay under these flourishing trees with all these colors, white, purple, yellow, before the fruits became mature and we take them out. I think I replied both questions. Thank you.
Thank you. All of them. In fact, this orange tree in these ruins and desolated house reminded me on Guernica tree that in fact survived the total destruction of Guernica, and that is now a symbol of revival of Guernica. New trees replanted from the seed of mother tree, and symbolizing this kind of the vitality and resilience. Now we have another questions. Let me see. Nasir Arafat is with us. So nice to have Nasir here. Nasir commented, maybe it's a time to introduce preservation as a tool for resistance. And Marilena Collier answered to that, very good point. We definitely use this kind of narrative in Palestine. Nasir is also from Palestine, he is from Nablus. Taking care of one's culture and self as the ultimate act of resistance. Then we have a comment by Luna, dear Marilena, Nada and Rafif, thanks a lot for this very and highly relevant work in Gaza, and it looks very promising. Lachlan informs us that there is a very good summary of World Heritage decisions regarding reconstruction by Susan Denier on Tube. And then we have one question, two more questions, let's say, until the end. One question is about the number of reconstructed sites during the it is Muhammad Abdullah. How many reconstructed heritage sites since last year? What's the basic concept of reconstruction of heritage trauma? That is the question that if someone would like to answer, I invite the panelists. We have the question, in fact, it's a comment by Osama Rumait. I think that UN organizations and NGOs which are involving and interesting in the culture heritage should play the main role in increasing and enhancing the awareness of the local people in cooperation with the interested authorities about feeling that the heritage is their own property, represents the history of their own country, encourage them to participate in revival process funding, and how they can achieve the socioeconomic benefits before engaging them in revival of heritage and post-trauma. I think that I fully agree with this, and I think that this liberal, let's say, peace approach is extremely important because societies in this post-trauma period are extremely weak, and they really need the support from different NGOs from abroad. And there is a question that I would like to invite Dr. Zaki to answer to that question. It is by Sonia Ibrahim, and thank you, Sonia, for following us and supporting this webinar regularly and participating to the discussion. It is about the community participation. What to do when the community is outside the country, like the case of old city of Aleppo. Most of the population emigrated or are displaced outside of the old city. How to create an idea of coming back when people, after 10 years of war, build their lives somewhere else.
Okay, well, in fact, we have been discussing such issues also with the UNHCR in places like refugee camps and places like that. I think there are many ways to do that. I think one way is to see how we could. I remember there were some activities, for example, for Syrians in Jordan in the Za'atari refugee camp, where they were introduced, especially the children and the young, how they would continue, you know, the attachment to their culture and to their heritage. We talk about simple things, not necessarily buildings. I mean, it could be like how people could think about cooking, drawing. You know, there could be a lot of creative activities in that sense to keep that kind of attachment and belonging. And I think this is also related to training in perhaps some kind of crafts, for example, that would generate income to the people, because I think there is also the economic dimension for them that is quite important. So I think there are many ways, depends on the context, of course. Now, how to encourage them to go back, I think it depends how the situation is. Of course, we enter into, you know, the political aspects of relations, and but I think people can keep their heritage even if they are away. I mean, even people in countries which don't speak the language, they can keep their language, for example. Language is their heritage. And it is the role of the parents in general, how to keep that continuing. I don't know if I answered the question. It's a hard question, but I'm trying to think about creative ways how we could engage people outside their country in their heritage, how they can contribute even to the recovery of their heritage. I mean, in some cases, you have you know, several NGOs outside helping to contribute to the reconstruction of places that were damaged after war. So there are many ways. I think it needs a study. Who are these people, where they are, what they can do, how we could make them more engaged, in what way, etc. I know that it's a very general answer, perhaps, but at least it gives you an idea that we have to think. We have to be creative about, you know, how we could make this happen.
Thank you so much. We are far beyond our time, and I'm so sorry that we do not have more time for this discussion. This question, in fact, the last question, opened a new field for the research and for establishing some kind of a framework. I know that the diasporic communities have been researched, and that this cultural memory and some kind of attachment to homeland is extremely important in all these studies and published works. Sometimes home for them is some kind of a map of the places of pain, because a lot of them had to leave home because of some tragic events or the personal losses, etc. But always there is some kind of attachment to what home and homeland means to them as a 0 point of all their sort of trajectories in a life, something as a starting point, how they recognize and perceive the world. So let me use this as some kind of a incomplete conclusion. We will of the extremely rich presentations and a wonderful webinar. Let me thank you once again for the wonderful presentations to all the speakers, panelists. Also, thank you, dear colleagues from the audience, for prompting the discussion that has been a sort of incomplete, and probably we could go on with this. And also I would like to thank to the whole team, and especially to translators who have been patient even when we have consumed that time beyond what they have expected to. So with looking forward to meeting all of you at the conference, when we will have more time for discussion and presentations, and also looking forward to the edited volume with the papers which have been presented today in short, in summary. So they are really exciting academic contributions to the field. Thank you very much, and thank you very much, Mr. Mohammed Zian Bouzian, for wonderful cooperation as always, and for this great support through your co-moderating of this webinar.
Thank you very much, Amra, and thanks all to our speakers and audience for their commitment also, and for the diverse and rich questions and discussions. I'm sure we'll have plenty of time to continue this very rich exchange and diverse during the conference. I would like also to thank our translator for her work, and for her commitment also to continue with us beyond the time that was dedicated to the webinar at the beginning. Thank you again for everything. Thanks a lot to all the audience being with us today. I hope that we will see you during the conference. We will announce it very soon, the dates. So if you would like to review one of the presentation, we will put the recording on our website, on our YouTube channel, just within some days after this webinar. It was a great pleasure to present and introduce all the speakers during the webinar today. All their contribution were really valuable. We thank them for sharing with us their experience and their knowledge. We would like also to inform our audience to not hesitate to get back to us if there are any inquiries or questions you would like to address. Thank you all again, and we hope to see you soon, hopefully in better situation within presential format. Thank you very much. مع السلامة.